Sada from Poison Rock. I'm here with SIIGA, finally. First of all, how are you?
I'm well. I said to you we weren't going to talk about the weather, but I will say it's a sunny day. It's a sunny day, so I'm happy. If it's sunny, I'm happy. I don't care where the hell I am. It's fine.
Yes, yes, you see, we fall in the weather forecast talking. Yes, it's very good day too. Of course, I mean, I'm glad to have you here, especially because we are getting close to a major release. And
Hmm.
it's a full length, but you release already two single, LCD, LCD, yes. And
Yes.
it's a Nostalgia Burns is the name of the album or is a single?
Yeah. No. So we had two singles.
Yeah.
The first one's called the LCD. The second one's called Recovery. But the record
From
is called Nostalgia
Nostalgia
Burns. Yeah.
Burns.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
title are already cinematic. So I guess also the music, like your previous music. But first, before starting, I want to know who SIIGA is. So your journey, your musical path.
My musical path.
Yeah.
How long did you say you had? This is... I mean, I don't know where it started, to be honest with you, Ada. I'll be honest, I wasn't really wanting to do music was not really my like it's sort of accidental a lot of it, to be
Okay.
honest. Yeah. I just kind of fell into it a little bit. I was never somebody who grew up being like, I want to be a musician. I actually wanted to fly airplanes when I was a kid. So I was
Okay.
interested in
I want to be a fireman.
Yeah, it's like yeah, it's just like and then my mother, I suppose, she played music a lot. She sang, and so there was always music in my house growing up. I just grew up with my mom. It was just the two of us. So I suppose that kind of was the start of it. I remember, I mean, this is going back a long time ago. We didn't have lots of money, so she entertained me with the. She had an old cassette player,
Yeah.
and it had. And I remember, I've actually still got it lying around somewhere, and it had a little you could record, you could talk to it. And so she would put cassettes in it and leave me to sort of, and I would just, and it had a little kind of, it was like a little meter that, when you spoke to it, it kind of
Yeah.
it registered. It was an old 80s thing. And so I used to sit looking at it and make noises. I used to record myself. I only thought about this. I was talking about this to somebody recently, but that was the first time I remember recording. I wasn't like making any music or anything, but I just was kind of interested in the visual of the tape and everything happening. And so then I got a bit older. Again, yeah, I wasn't really music. I liked listening to music, but I was always outside. I'm kind of an outdoor kind of like I like being outside. I don't like being on a fucking computer and just I like being
Yeah.
outside all the time. So I was kind of always out, and then the music kind of started. I got into the drums. That was the first thing I remember playing was the
Wow. Okay.
drums. Yeah. So like I remember being in school and there was a drum kit. It was fucked, but it was sitting in the corner of the room, and the teacher had put cardboard. He'd cut cardboard out and put it on all the drum skins, so
Yeah.
that it didn't really make a very good noise. It was just like dog, dog, dog. But I started kind of like I thought that looks kind of fun. I liked hitting things, and
Yeah.
it was kind of like sort of. So I started kind of messing around with this drum kit in school a little bit, and then I remember speaking to my mum was like, "You're not having a drum kit. Like, there's not even any room in the house. Like, you can't have a drum kit." And so I think there was like a vague kind of attempt at one point. She sort of said to me, a friend of hers' son was learning piano. I remember this, and so she said you could try piano, and I was like, I didn't really fancy it much, but I thought, oh, I'll try it. It's the only time I ever had I can't read any music, so I tried. I went to this lesson. I
Yeah.
mean, I should try and be politically correct here, but the woman that was teaching me was a bit scary looking. Let's just say that. Yeah, and and I was very young, and I was a bit kind of like intimidated. And so she sort of was leaning down on me, kind of trying to, and she was, I remember she was very posh English lady, and she tried to sing, and she was like, what, what? And I was just like, I thought this
Okay.
isn't much fun. And so I kind of learned a couple of things, and I thought, oh, fuck this. and I stopped, and
That's
so that was the sort of I went back to the drum kit, and then I lived in a street of it. It was like a council house, kind of government house street in Scotland, in the Highlands, and a guy moved in next door. This is how it started. I'll try and be quick because I know you haven't got loads of time. This is again why I don't do interviews because I just talk shit for hours. But
Don't worry. Good luck. I'm the
the
same. Don't worry. We can go forever.
I'll just go like that if I'm talking too much. But there was this guy moved in. Now I think I must have been about. I feel like I was about like 12 or 13 or something like that, you know. And this guy turned up, and our next door neighbor, and I remember he drove into the street, and he was a fucking oddball. Like in terms of like Sky, like a guy like this showing up, and this is going back a while, like, and he had this old like sports car, but it was like a piece of shit. It was falling to pieces. And I remember he had the sticker on the back that said, I built my reputation with Snap-on. It was weird the shit you remember. But anyway, he kind of pulled in with his car and he got out. Anyway, he got out and he had these like black glasses on and his like hair was all like that. And he got out and he pulled his fucking guitar case out the back of his car. Oh, sorry, my phone's alerting me stuff. And I was kind of like, what the hell? He kind of got out of the car and he just looked like some like old 60s pop star or something, right? And I was like in my living room because our house is all you could look on everything. I was like, who the hell is this guy? He's there and he's got this guitar case and everything. Anyway, he moved next door to us and he was like this mysterious guy. Like he's like he plays the guitar. Like who is he? Is he like you look
James
like an old
Dean.
he's like this old kind of like pop star guy. And so anyway, during that time, my other neighbour on the other side, his name was Noddy. He was a wee guy from Glasgow. He had like tattoos on his knuckles and shit. It was just wee kind of like teddy
Yeah.
boy kind of guy that lived next door. Lovely guy. He's actually still there. But he had this old shitty guitar. Now he used to play Pink Floyd and AC/DC fucking
Oh,
24/7, right? That's all. And because in our houses, it didn't have thick walls, you could hear it coming through the wall. So I used to hear like, and it was like, he was, and I'd hear him singing, like Pink Floyd, fucking 8 minute songs going on for, and all this going on. So
you're
he's on that
sad. Yeah,
side. Yeah. And on the other side, I've got this weird kind of like pop star guy that I don't know who he is yet. And I'm in the middle of it, not really giving it, wanting to fly airplanes, but I
yeah.
was told I can't because I remember I went to they had like an interview for it. And the guy said, "Well, someone from your background." I mean, they would never be able to say that now, but at the time they said you had to come through like a kind of private school, and I hadn't any of that. We were just like fucking from
Yeah.
from the from the Highlands, whatever. So that kind of cost my sort of. I remember that kind of stunting my interest a wee bit in it. So suddenly I was kind of messing around with these drums and things. And anyway, sorry, long story short, the neighbor of the Pink Floyd neighbor had this old guitar. And I don't know why, but he sort of, I think he must have seen me sort of, or I was out in the garden or something like that. And he's like, I've got this guitar. You should try this. Try this. We were talking about music,
Yeah.
and it was a piece of shit. I didn't know at the time. I mean, to me, it was like, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing, this thing, right? So he gave me this like
Exactly.
acoustic guitar. Now, I found out much later, actually, at the time, I was trying to play this thing and it had been through a fucking flood. I think his house had flooded. So the neck on it was like a bow and arrow, right? And I didn't know any better. So the strings were like about that high off the neck, and they were like cheese wire. And I was trying to play this piece of shit, but I was managing to sort of get something out
It's
of it. The first thing I
a
taught myself.
yeah.
So yeah, the first thing I taught myself was like the Blues Brothers, that da 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 da, because it just had one string on it, and it was so hard to play. And I thought, God, guitar's really fucking hard, man. I was like, this is a hard instrument. I thought people play it, looks easy. I was like, why is this so difficult? Anyway, I was messing around, didn't know what I was doing. I started fucking about with the tuning pegs one
Yeah.
afternoon because I was getting kind of bored of it, I think. And then it went like that, and the strings popped on it, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was it. I didn't realize you could
Yeah.
even change the strings. I thought, oh, I thought the
It's
guitar's
gone. It's
broken. I was like,
gone.
that's it, it's done, done. So I think I remember speaking to, I went, like, my mum was maybe downstairs or something. I went downstairs and I was like, Mum, I've broken Nori's guitar. And she's like, oh, she says, why don't you knock on that guy's door? He's got a guitar, maybe he can help you, right? So I thought, so I was quite kind of, I suppose it was a bit cheeky to do it. But anyway, I went out the back through the garden. I've got this guitar in my hand and I'm like, bam, 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 bam on this guy's door. Anyway, he comes to the door. He must have, I don't even like, I mean, I don't think you'd have to live in Scotland and live in the Highlands to probably realize how weird and unusual this was at the time. But the guy came to the door, right? And he's like with a cigar, right? And he's got like the glasses on and the hair and everything. And he's like, hi, can I help you? And I was like, and I mean, like I say, we did not live in a
Yeah.
flash place. Like, and he was like, and he comes, he's like, can I help you? And I said, yeah. I was like, sorry to bother you. I was like, but you play the guitar? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, I've got this old guitar and I broke it. And he's like, oh, okay, do you want to bring it in, you know? So I was like, so I went into his house. So I got into this guy's house. And he's in there and he's got his like table full of like stuff. And he's just this alternative dude, right? And like, I've never seen anybody like this at this point in my life. You know, I've just been like kind of
Yeah.
surrounded by fucking Gaelic speaking fucking bores. And then there's suddenly this guy that's like into all this mad stuff. And he's like, so I'm in this guy's house. And I'm like, this guy's really interesting. And so I'm sort of chatting away to him. And he goes, oh, that's fine, you know, we can, and he's like, you know, yeah, yeah, we can fix the guitar. So he's like,
With the
strings it
kids
up for me.
walking. Yeah.
Yeah. Place
Really
was just like a haze of smoke everywhere. You know, I would come out of there absolutely stinking of cigars. But anyway, he said to me, you know, I can fix it. So he fixed it. And he said to me, he says, you realize this guitar's like really not, you know, it's broken pretty much. It's been in I think it's been in a flood. And so he explained to me, you know, it actually should be a lot easier to play. But he said to me, he says, what have you been learning on it? And I said, I'm kind of trying to do some stuff. And he says, what can you do? So I went, da 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 da. And he's like, okay. And he's like, how did you learn that? And I said, well, I just listened to it. And he's like, right. He says, do you want to try and learn anything else on it? And I said, sure. So he then turned around and he picks up this guitar. And I remember it was called an Ovation and it had like a kind of round back on it. And it was a nylon strung guitar. And then I saw his hands and he had these like massive talon, like nails. And he sat there and he started playing some stuff. Anyway, he turned out to be like a really high level classical guitar player, like flamenco. He'd gone over to Spain. He'd studied under Segovia, like he'd, you know, and anyway, like I don't want to tell his life story. That's his journey, but he things had
His
happened.
interview. His interview.
Yeah, he's actually passed away now, sadly, but he had, you know, his life, whatever, he'd gone on his journey, certain things had happened. He'd ended up living next door to me temporarily. And I think he was probably looking for some stimulation, and suddenly he's got this
Yeah.
like kid that's like knocking his door, and it was kind of like, and he sort of, you know, and I was kind of really sort of like interested suddenly in this thing. That's sort of what happens to me. I start something, and then I'm like kind of become really sort of into it.
Okay.
Anyway, so he says, well, look, and he showed me this thing. I remember it was called Malanguela, and it was like this kind of. I actually remember reading Keith Richards' book, and I think that was the first thing he learned the guitar. But it was like an old-fashioned kind of classical Spanish kind of da da da
Yeah.
da 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 da. It's like that da 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 kind of thing.
Exactly.
So,
That.
so suddenly there's a fucking kid from Skye in a council house in Portree learning fucking Spanish guitar off some washed
Really?
up mad guy. Yeah, so it was just like a bit of a lightning bolt moment. And then so he showed me this thing on the day, and for whatever reason, and it's not to like I'm not to blow my own trumpet, but I just picked it up straight away. I saw him and I did it, and it was and I just found it kind of easy. And that's I mean, I kind of tend to be a bit like that. I don't really if something's easy, I go to that. I'm sort of like, so I was sort of picked the guitar up and suddenly I was like, okay, it's not that hard. And then, so after school, I started going around to see him. Um, so I'd kind of get home, pick this thing up, go and dunk, 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 knock on his door, and he would sit and show me some stuff. And so gradually over the sort of following, I guess it was a few months of that. And there was an old 60s band in the UK called The Shadows. I don't know if you ever heard of them. It was like Cliff Richard and The Shadows. It was a very, very, yeah, I mean, it wasn't music I listened to, but he started showing me these kind of tracks by the Shadows. There was one called Foot Tapper, I remember, and like all this kind of stuff. And it just gave me suddenly this dexterity around the guitar because it was all this picked kind of stuff. Anyway, sorry, I will stop in a second, but basically what happened after that was I started to get kind of interested in it. My mum suddenly saw that I'd had this kind of interest in it. Up till then, I'd been causing fucking mischief outside. So I think she was kind of glad I was doing something like that. And so I said to her, I was like, I said, could I try and get a guitar? And she was like, oh, they're very expensive and all of that. So I think I'd been doing it for maybe like 8 or 9 months or something at this point. And then we had this thing, it was like a catalog you could like order
Yeah.
things out of and you could buy it but pay it up. I mean, they were bastards. They would fucking charge you so much interest, but it was like a thing like so my mum had this big catalog, it was a big book of stuff, and I found this guitar in it. And I think at the time, I think it was about £60, which was like a
Mm.
fucking lot of money then for us, like. And I said to her, and she said, "Right, okay." She says, You're obviously kind of doing it. You're playing it. Let's get you a guitar." So anyway, I get this guitar. It was black. I was like, this kind of like amazing looking thing, and it arrived. And I swear to God, like when I picked it up, I mean, I think anybody who's learning guitar, I would suggest learn it on a fucking guitar that's been through a flood. Because I tell you what, see, by the time I got on that real one,
It's
I
gonna
was
be
flying, man. I was like, what? I was like, no way. It's like, this is easy street. So I got this guitar. But then what happened was I kind of then started getting into music in a different way. Like I'd always listened to music, but I suddenly started like looking out for stuff. I then sort of discover, Jimi Hendrix.
yeah.
And then suddenly it was like, I was like, okay, right, wow, that's like that. What is that? And at that point, you're talking about like, I'm looking at like borrowing videos of people. It's like, it's like there was no internet. It was like
Yeah.
borrowing videos and like cassette tapes and shit, And I didn't have a CD player till I was about fucking 17 or something, It was like didn't have any of that stuff. So I was borrowing stuff. I was borrowing tapes and then taping them, copying them, and then lend
And
them
also,
back,
I don't know if you ever did that to record the song from the
the
radio.
radio.
Yeah, with the waiting. Wait, that's the song. Wait, wait. And there's maybe in the radio, there's the speaker sing also talking in the cassette.
I know. I
I
used to
was
try and cut it off before they would
yeah,
start
I was with
talking. I
this.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was it. So that was kind of, but then I went back to the guy that had been showing me the stuff, and I suddenly turn up and I've got this Jimi Hendrix thing. And he's like this classical guitar player, and we've got these two acoustic guitars. And I'm like, can we try and learn this thing? And he was kind of like, and he suddenly, to be honest with you, he kind of got a bit pissed off with me a wee bit because he was like kind of trying to sort of show me this kind of, because he was like trying to teach me to hold a guitar between my legs the right
Yeah.
way and do all this. But as soon as I saw like a Jimi Hendrix video, it was fucked. I was like
You
that.
wanted
I
to go
just
like
wanted to. It was fucked. It was fucked. I just was like, I was straight away. I'm like, I'm getting an electric guitar. I've got to find a way to get an electric guitar. I have to find a
oh,
way. And I was like, and so I bought an electric guitar secondhand. I remember I bought it. It was a head teacher of my school, and his kid had an electric guitar, and he said he was going to sell it, and I saved up my money and I fucking sold some shit, and I went to his house and I bought this guitar, and it was a Epiphone
oh,
SG. It was the same kind of guitar as Angus Young and
yeah.
the AC/DC had. And it was just like, it was a cheap copy of it, but it had this little amp. It was called a crate amp. And I bought the two things off him. Fucking hell. After that, man, my house was just like, like that all the time, man. I was just
There
in
was
there.
the tree house with guitars. So
It was just the guitar. Like, I was just like, I guess all I was doing was picking the guitar and I was just listening. And I just taught myself after that.
it just
I kind of, the guy just didn't, he sort of lost interest a bit and I lost interest in what he was showing. I'd gotten a bit, that's what happens to me. Like, it's like, if I can just show me enough that I can get something, then I'm gone and I'm away doing my own thing with it. It's like I don't want to sit fucking about. Like just like
Yeah.
give me, it's like okay, I've got three chords. That's enough. Let's go. Let's write some music, or whatever. It's
It's
like
something that
so.
you felt.
Yeah, so I just started
Wow.
learning, and so I just became obsessive with like Jimi Hendrix, really, I suppose. And I was kind of learning it all, but I was learning it from listening to it,
Yeah.
and then I just kept at it, I suppose. It became like a really. I tell you one thing, that Alan was the guy that had
Yeah.
shown me the stuff. Something he said to me that always stuck with me, actually, because I grew up on my own. I spent a lot of time on my own. And I remember when I picked the guitar up with him, and he said to me, he's like, "This guitar," he says, "will be the best friend that you ever have." And he said to me, and I said, "What do you mean?" And he says, "You hold it to your body." He says, "It resonates against your chest." He says, "It's close to your heart." And he says it's one of the few instruments. He says there's nothing in between you. He says you play it with that. He says your skin is tactile. He says there's no
Yeah.
keys. It's not got like a reed that you're. He says your hands are
Oh,
creating the sound, and that was his kind of take on it. He said a good guitar player, he said, can make any guitar sound good. It's like because it comes from the
and
kind of hands, really.
yeah, exactly.
And so that kind of always sort of stuck in my head. And he was right. I mean, like I say, the music, I wasn't like particularly, I wasn't chasing a music career. I just suddenly, like, it was an outlet of creativity, really. And
Yeah.
I just found my language that was easy. And again, it was because it just felt kind of easy, I suppose.
You,
And then I don't know, something maybe just sort of triggered. And I can honestly say, I've never picked up a guitar and not just felt like something's coming. It's like it's always interesting
well,
and something always happens. So
yeah.
anyway, there you
And
go. That
from,
was
I
the
mean,
start
and
of it.
from Jimi Hendrix, how you ended up with your song? Because, like I said, I mean, I don't know before, but like for what I can gather, for what I gathered the line about the first album you released was the Sea and the Mirror with of
Yeah, it's not
2015.
like Jimi Hendrix at all. Yeah.
No, so there is kind of a gap. I mean, because it's more like you find like I said, the the word could be kind of folk music, cinematic music. It's it's
hmm
it's better to say kind of folk because can folk rock, folk pop can embody everything.
hmm
But we're speaking of the past because the present has
hmm
different vibes also. So what has to do Jimi Hendrix in all of that? The experimentation that stuck with you?
I don't know. I think what happened to me was I did that, and then I left Sky as soon as I could. I left Sky when
Yeah.
I was 17, and I
Oh,
moved to
wow.
London. Yeah, I moved to London, and I thought I would just take my guitar to London, and 2 weeks, and I would be like, "That'd be it. I'll just find a band." At that time, I wasn't like writing songs or anything. I
Yeah.
just was obsessively playing the guitar, and so. Don't know. I think I kind of carried that sort of with me. And then I was in band. I ended up in and out of bands. I
Yeah.
mean, I kind of, and I was, to be honest with you, when I was in my sort of very early 20s, I was gigging, I was traveling a lot. I was playing in a band at the time that it was quite heavy. It was very
Yeah.
guitar driven kind of stuff, very rocky kind of music. And probably a little bit of that carried into it. And then I think what happened was I sort of discovered songwriting, I suppose, and that kind of took me away a little bit from the
Yeah.
guitar. I mean, I don't really play the guitar the way that I used to now, like,
So,
and I mean, this last record, I just got obsessed with old vintage synthesizers and shit like
yeah.
that,
I heard.
and yeah, and I was writing a lot with bass, and I was kind of. So then I think what happened was the guitar triggered my interest, I suppose, in creating music. Before the guitar, my mum's kind of music in the house was like
Yeah.
she would just play like it was like Simon and Garfunkel or fucking ABBA, basically.
Yeah.
And it kind of and when I look at my own music, actually, I think, oh, maybe that because there's this kind of like crossover sort of like
Yeah.
you say, there's sort of elements of because ABBA is just like pop, and I fucking love that stuff, and
Yeah.
it's and then like you've got your kind of Simon and Garfunkel kind of melody. My mum was really into melody, so I think then what happened was I started to kind of write songs, or at least I kind of wrote songs by accident as well, though, because what happened was I sort of started a band with a friend of mine from school when we were like, I don't know what we were, like 21 or something, I can't remember. And uh, and he was a postman at the time, and so he would finish his job as a postman, and then afterwards we would get together and sort of just jam away. And
Yeah.
then it was kind of like, are we going to start a band? And then it was like, I suppose we better write some songs. Who the fuck's going to do that? You know? And it was like, and I was kind of like, I don't know, like I don't even know how to write. So, and then it was like, and then I started kind of messing around. I had bought this little 8-track tape
Okay.
recorder when I was in London, actually. I queued up. In fact, I was in London 2 weeks ago with a friend and I was telling him we walked past it. I says, I fucking queued for about 9 hours at this shop to try and buy we had a big sale at the time. I
Yeah.
remember, and I bought this like little tape recorder machine. So I'd kind of started messing around with recording a little bit, I suppose. But again, it wasn't songwriting. I was just like making
Yeah.
sounds and fucking about. So then suddenly the two of us started kind of talking about trying to start a band, like the old way. I don't think people do that like that anymore. The world's fucking changed. But back then it was like, we're like, we're gonna get out of this place. Let's fucking start a band, man. And like, and
Yeah,
so
yes,
we
I
sort of
remember
started,
that
yes.
enthusiasm, that just like, okay, we're gonna make it, we're gonna be on, I don't know, in some arena somewhere.
Well, it wasn't even that for us. We just wanted to get the fuck out of Sky. Like we were just like, to be
No,
honest with you, because we ended up in like I remember like with that band we were out. We played in fucking Red Square in Moscow with that band, and I remember playing in we were out in around mainland Europe and stuff, but we didn't expect that. We were just glad to get anywhere, really. Like so, it was. But we started kind of making music, and then I started kind of messing around with the idea of writing songs. So suddenly, to write songs, I kind of started picking up an acoustic guitar again because it was easier, and you could just sit in the house and
yeah,
not make too much noise and stuff. So I guess that was sort of how the songwriting started. And then it was like, oh, we need to get a singer. Who the fuck's going to do that? And it's like, so we started thinking, right, let's get a singer. And we started trying to look for somebody and we couldn't find anybody. And then the guy that I was sort of playing with at the time said, well, you're writing these songs. Why don't you do it? And I was like, I can't fucking sing, man. I'm not doing that. And so like, and so it was all, it's like I say, I mean, it's just like the whole thing's been like one big accident. So it was like kind of just
what is
like
SIIGA? One big accident.
one big accident. It's just like the whole of SIIGA has been basically we have no fucking money. What can we do and make something amazing with nothing? And that's kind of been the ethos. I mean, fucking hell, I went to LA and made a robot last year. That was on like I'm not sitting with like some backing of a label or any shit. It's always just like I'm always just like, what's the idea? And then fucking worry about doing
I
how to
know.
do it afterwards, like.
So how do you find out the songwriting and your voice?
The songwriting, the voice, yeah. I mean, it was again, like I say, it was like at the time it was just an idea to start a band, and we didn't know what to do. So suddenly it was like, okay, we need songs. So I start trying to write songs and need a singer. Ended up trying to sort of do that. So it was kind of that's when the idea of songwriting kind of started. And I think maybe what happened was then suddenly I became interested again with just like melody, became
Oh,
sort of, where I'd been really obsessing about the guitar in a way. I mean, I was kind of like, okay, I've done that now. I've kind of got that. I was able to do everything I wanted to do on the guitar, and I was probably, to be honest with you, a much more proficient guitar player than I am now. I used to, when I was younger, I would just play every day. Da, da, da.
same,
Now I'm a lazy as fuck, man. I pick it up now and again. When I need to do something with it, I pick it up. But but so then I kind of started getting interested in melody, I suppose, and that then I suppose kind of I started pulling back to the influences from maybe growing up with like the music in the house and stuff. My mum been like singing a lot and that kind of thing. So she was probably quite a big influence on me, my mum, in terms of like how I started to form melody because she was
yeah.
very melodic. She was always kind of like singing and kind of it was very musical actually, but not in a professional sense, but just she
Uh,
was kind of a music kind of orientated kind of person. She taught Gaelic choir singing and stuff, so she had that sort of melody in her, I suppose. And so then I started kind of messing around with stuff.
um,
Then kind of thought, right, I need to write some songs. What the fuck do you write a song about? And so like, the sort of first. So it just became like there was the weather was quite prevalent of pissing rain a lot of the time got into it. So, but the and it's just started to form lyrics and things. I don't think they were very good at the beginning. I remember there was some pretty awful sounding stuff. But it was sort of how it all started really.
Yeah.
And then I suppose then my friend and I we sort of formed this band. We got a drummer who was from like I remember actually at the time he was like playing in a pub band.
Okay.
And he was actually out playing all the time and he was like out doing covers and he was only like I mean we were all just like 20,
But
21.
yeah.
They were young. And so he was like going to the pub and play. We were like, fuck, man, he's like a real musician, this guy. Like he's like kind of out doing all these gigs and stuff. And like we were like, wow, what's that like? And so and he was a little bit like, oh yeah, I've got a gig
Yeah.
on this weekend. He was like playing in some fucking bar somewhere. But to us it was like he might as well be playing in like fucking
Yeah.
Wembley Stadium or something. We were like, oh wow. So he then kind of decided to join, and then another guy decided to join. And we kind of started practicing at his house, which was about 2 hour drive away from where we lived on Skye. So we used to drive all the way to this middle of nowhere village and practice in this guy's uh, house. Basically, they had this old house his parents were fixing up and had an old
Yeah.
piece of shit kind of shed at the back, and we just kind of started rehearsing in there. And kind of that was sort of how the sort of playing in a band stuff formed, and I was writing more and more songs, but I was kind of learning, and in a way, it sort of was a bit weird because what happened was we were all just learning. We didn't know what we were doing at all. I certainly didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I was just figuring it all out. But we kind of got lucky, and suddenly, like, we got picked up and ended up on some festivals. Like the first gig we played was a festival, and then we started and then we got onto this thing. I remember it was funny, man. It was like they had this thing in Scotland. This is going back a long time. It was called the Scottish Style Awards, and it was this like kind of fashion
Okay.
pretentious fucking bullshit thing, but it was on in Glasgow at the time, and none of us we weren't in Glasgow, but it was like the main city, I guess, in Scotland at the time. And like I say, I'd already buggered off to London when I was 17, so I'd kind of come back to Skye.
Okay.
Um, so anyway, we got this gig at this thing, and it was going to be on TV and all this kind of shit. And but there was like all these like it was like I use the term loosely, celebrities and all this kind of shit. And then they asked us, the woman who was running it saw us play at a festival, said, "We want you to play this song with this song, and we want to play it at the open up our awards show with this thing." And we'd only been playing for like I don't know 6 months or something. So so we're not
Yeah, you're
even
in
we
the
don't fucking know what
beginning
we're doing. Yeah, just like and so suddenly it was like we end up at this
at the
thing.
festival.
And the fucking, I think the guy that was playing, the other guy that was in the band, he he was like I said, he was a postman. So he had like a fucking postman uniform coming back from work to this fashion show. I think they thought it was like Angus Young with they thought it was like a thing. But he was just like didn't get changed. And then one of the other boys showed up. I have to be careful. It's a long time ago, but I don't like to drag people's names into stuff that they have no control over. But let's just say that one of the guys that was in the band, he had a big car and it was like an estate car, like a station
Yeah,
wagon type thing. And he's
that's
the only
yeah.
one that had a car. It was a heap of shit. But anyway, because he had the biggest car, he used to take all our stuff. So he turns up at the back of this fucking Style Awards. We're trying to make an impression, right? And he turns up and his car was red. And I think it belonged to like the post office or something at one point. He had this red car. But I was like, what the fuck happened to your car? And his whole car, all the paint and everything was all stripped off it. It was all like rust and shit and black stuff up and down it. It looked like it had been like in a fucking bomb had gone off or something. And he came in with his car, right? And like all these other like people are like there was models flying in from New York. They're all coming. He comes in with this old shitty car. I'm like, what happened to your car? He's like, oh, my sister was going out with this guy. He said, and she ended up getting a job or some shit happened, and so she decided that they were going to she was splitting up with this guy and leaving him. She told him like the day before. I think he thought this was her car, and he'd come round with fucking battery acid
Oh God.
and like trashed the car the day before the gig. So we arrived. So that was how we arrived. Like we arrived like a bunch of complete and utter like reprobates from like the Highlands, and we come in and played this thing. Anyway, we played it, and we were, I suppose we were pretty good, I guess, because then we get off the back of that, we were off with this label. We were in
That's
London for a bit, and so that was all going on. But I'll be honest with you, I didn't enjoy it at all. I wasn't like it was never the like we were getting all this stuff was going on, and we were kind of, I suppose in a way it's what everyone dreams to do.
yeah.
But for me, I was just wanting to make stuff. That's my kind of thing. I like making things. And so
Yeah.
at the time I was just still trying to work out how to write songs. And I was like, and suddenly I'm like this kind of pushed to the front of this band. I'm supposed to be a singer. I hadn't really figured that out properly yet. I was kind of, and I was almost learning it in front of everybody. You know, I was getting fucking pushed out on these stages, and I'm like, I'm not even sure what the fuck I'm doing. So I was kind of, a lot of bravado came with that. I sort of almost slightly bullshitted my way through it because I just had to find a way to kind of like feel like find some confidence because I didn't really know what I was doing. So anyway, that kind of went on, and so we get the band kind of rolled on for some time, and then it kind of I got really fed up with it. I didn't feel like creatively I was really doing anything that I was that interested in, and blah blah blah. So I decided I was leaving. I thought I'm done. You know, I was retiring from music at the ripe old age of like 23 or something like that. You know,
I'm
I was like, ah, fuck
retired
this.
now.
Yeah,
I
I'm
need
done.
my pension now.
Exactly, I'm done. You know, and so we kind of I decided I was leaving, and it caused a load of shit. You know, it was like I'd shattered some dreams or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
whatever. Like I was like, you know, we were young, really, and so I then kind of came away from it for a bit, and then decided I was getting really interested in recording, and I was
Okay.
like kind of starting to figure that out a bit as well. So I went away and decided to make this sort of album of music. And I'm not yet SIIGA. I basically ended up making this album of music. I camped on the floor. So a mate of mine had access to this. He was like this school had this recording
Yeah.
equipment, and he had the keys to it, and he was looking after it. So we basically decided in the evenings I was going to record this. I had this album in my head, and it
Okay.
was a bit like Tom Petty or some shit. I'd had all this like I always had these kind of crazy sort of like visual ideas. I think that Jimi Hendrix stuff, the covers, I would always kind of
That's
like
something
try
that
and
stuck with you with Jimi Hendrix back when you were a kid.
yeah, definitely. The theater of it definitely stuck with me. And Bowie, like, and that was my two things. Like, you know, David Bowie, like, I just
Yeah.
loved that idea of like this
Of the visual, yeah.
otherworldly kind of, yeah, and just like the idea of like this music kind of being in this whole other dimension. Because
Yeah.
to me,
Enjoy.
like that music interested me because I would look at these visuals and I would hear this sound and I would be like,
You
I didn't know anything about these people, you
exactly.
know?
Also, you'll see the sound.
Yeah, that too. And that was kind of the other thing that started to happen. Like I kind of this color thing with music has been a big thing for me over the years too. That I only really kind of came to realize a few years ago. But at the time I couldn't. So again, I wasn't able to read any music, and I was kind of faking my way through it all a little bit. Um, because I was just doing it all by ear, and I could hear stuff in my head, and I was trying to find a way to kind of get it out, really, you know. So then anyway, I'll try and fast forward. So I'll do this thing, blah blah blah. Wasn't really that happy with it. Then I decided that I was gonna. I thought I'm kind of done with music. I sort of thought I'll do something else now. And
Well done.
fucking, you know, wasn't really bothered. You know, I was like, just kind of. I thought this big world out there. There's loads of cool things I like doing. You know, so I was like, so I thought, so anyway, I ended up. I was living in a flat at the time,
Okay.
and I couldn't make any noise, and I'd never lived in a flat before. And I don't know, I just can't help myself. I'm always like making things. So I think what happened was I had a little bit of time away from it, and then there was a guitar lying in the flat, and then I started fucking
Always the
about with it.
guitar.
Yeah, I started messing around, but I couldn't make much noise. So this is kind of there is a point to this. How I end up going from this like Jimi Hendrix sort of
Okay.
noise to SIIGA, see in the mirror world. What happened was I couldn't make much noise in this flat, so I started kind of like trying to write songs, but I was writing them and I was picking up the acoustic guitar, and then I sort of went back to like that guy I was telling you about, who was like the classical guitar player,
Yeah.
who'd kind of showed me this more fingerstyle kind of guitar, and I'd kind of sort of I'd sort of put that all away, and I
Yeah.
was playing like electric and stuff. But then I picked up the acoustic, and I guess I started getting back into just I don't know. I'll just go with whatever's at to hand. It's like if there's a
Yeah.
whatever's lying around, I'll do something with it. It's not really. I don't
That's
consider
completely
myself like
that's completely
guitar or whatever. It's just
yeah.
whatever's there. So I sort of started playing around with the acoustic guitar. Another again accident and lack of money. A friend of mine who was like this songwriter who I'd kind of gotten to know, he had come out of a record deal and everything had gone to shit for him, and he was kind of trying to figure out life a bit. And he had this microphone, and
Okay.
again he was like revered. It's got a fucking valve in it. It's just like amazing. I mean, in retrospect, it's a piece of shit, but at the time we were kind of like, wow, you've got this microphone. So I
Yeah.
said to him, could I borrow your microphone? I want to I've got an idea. I'm going to sort of just go and try and see if I've got any songs or anything like that. So he lent me this thing, this microphone, and I had this little recording thing. I didn't know what I was doing with much of it. And I fucked off back to Skye. My mum was still alive at the time. And I was sort of falling out of life a wee bit. I was like, I didn't really know where I was going. Things were, yeah, I just was kind of like, I don't really know. I'd sort of fallen out of love with music a bit and wasn't really, and I found the industry part of it
Yeah.
really challenging because I'd been thrown into that world with labels and stuff, and
Amazing.
it wasn't fun. I like having fun, and if I'm not having fun, I don't give a
What's the
shit
point?
what it
Yeah.
is. I'm like, I'm done. Like, I can't be arsed. It's like, if it's not a laugh, then forget it. So anyway, sorry, I'll get to the point. So I borrow this microphone, um, and I go back to Skye, and I ended up going on a sailing trip to a set of islands called the Shants.
Okay.
And that's a whole other story for another day. But anyway, ended up on this boat. I'm full of fucking stories, side quests, my friend calls them. But I end up on this boat, um, and I had the guitar with me. I decided to take it, and I'm not normally someone that does that. I hate, you go to a party and someone pulls a guitar. I can't be arsed. I hate that shit. But I took this guitar with me. I thought I'll take it, see what happens. So
Research play.
I'm out on the Shant Isles, and they're near Skye, and there was an old house there and stuff like that. And it was in the evening. I was sitting drinking a beer, and it was just in the nature. It was just like out in the nature. It's like you were talking about earlier, saying in Sicily, you're heading out off into. I'd lost connection with it. I'd been away. I'd been living in London. I'd been living in the city. I'd been traveling around. I was in Australia for a
Yeah.
while, and so I'd kind of lost connection with Skye, in all honesty. So I went back, and I had this kind of almost like reconnection with the place because my whole childhood had been about I need to go, I need to leave. I just wanted to know what was out there, what's out in the world, what's out in the world.
Of course.
Obsessed with
Yeah. Of course.
that. So suddenly I was like, I went back and spent some time in that environment and just kind of like sort of connected with it, I guess, again in some ways. And anyway, went back to my mum's house, and a friend of mine had told me if you hang up like jackets and coats and things, you can make a sound booth because it'll give you sort of soundproof.
Yeah.
So there was a cupboard in the corner of one of the rooms. So I went in there and I just hung up all these old coats. My mum had
Okay.
had all her old coats. She kept all that shit, and I hung them all up. And there were some pretty jazzy ones, big like 70s looking stuff and
Yeah.
that, and like so they were good soundproofing tools. And so I
Your
hung them all
mom's
up,
studio.
stuck this microphone in the cupboard that I'd borrowed, and I just hit record, and I had no ideas, and I was just sort of messing around and mumbling and stumbling and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Just kind of just blah, as it kind of happens. Songwriting for me is often just sort of stream of consciousness. It's like almost like it's like you're tuned into it all the time, but you have to hit record, and then suddenly it kind of
Release.
comes out. So I did all that. Didn't really think much of it. Came back to Glasgow at the time, back to the flat I was in, and then some other shit was going on, and then I left it for a few weeks, I think, and then I came back to it one afternoon, and I just was like, "What was all that shit I did in Sky?" You know, and I was kind of like sat at the computer and I kind of played it, and I listened through, and there was like about half an hour, 40 minutes of just shite, really, that I'd just been kind of like just. But in the middle of it all, suddenly this fully formed song, which was called Hollow Bones, which was like a kind of like SIIGA track, kind of spilled out in the middle of it, and I was like, I thought, what's that? And I just kind of heard this wee sort of thing that I must have done, and it just kind of, and there was like, 80% of the lyric, there was a few lines, and there was like bits and melody and all that. And then it kind of went further, and there was another song. There was like two or three that ended up on that record. There was just the sort of
Yeah.
kernel of it was there, and I kind of heard it, and I thought, oh, okay, it's actually maybe something in that, Yeah. So then I kind of took it all out of there, and then yeah, I just started making some demos in the flat, and because I couldn't make a noise, I was doing everything. It was very gentle, it was very quiet. I was playing the guitar really quietly. I was singing in a different way that was very kind of just low key
So that also
and
helped to change the sound.
changed the sound. So the sound of it was purely down to the reason that I couldn't make a noise. And so I was
Okay.
just like doing this thing. And then I had this reverb pedal. It was a cheap thing that I had. And I just started cranking different things into this to make these sort of soundscapes. And I started creating, and what was happening was I kind of was reflecting on my time out in the islands and back in Skye, and I was kind of like, and suddenly I was like kind of just using these sort of visuals that I'd had in my head and these memories and
Yeah.
colors and all of that shit that would kind of suddenly started flooding in. It was like I opened a valve or something happened. Like it just was like, and it's never turned off since, but it was just like that. And suddenly I felt like I got flooded with all this sound that I didn't even know I had. And then I just started making all these kind of soundscapes and kind of started layering my songs over them and just demoed them all. And then I decided that I was going to try and I thought, fuck it, I'll record a record. And I thought, new start, I want to just do the whole thing. And I didn't even want to be in it. I remember getting a label got involved at one point and they asked me to do a publicity shot. And I sent them a picture of the back of my head. And I was like, I just thought, I don't want to be in it. I thought, it's fuck all to do with me. I just want the music to be this thing. And I had this idealistic idea. The fucking internet killed all of that because everyone wants to see everything now. But at the time, I wanted to go back to Jimi
Yeah.
Hendrix, David Bowie. I was like, I want to fucking see this thing that I don't know who this person is. I want to have my element of imagination that kind of fills the gaps and things. So I started making this SIIGA album. And then I met Ian, who has been with me now since the beginning of well, not the beginning, but close to the beginning of SIIGA. And he was an engineer, a mix engineer at the time. So I was doing these little demos and things, and I was recording them in my flat and trying to make this record. And then I met Ian, and he had the beginnings of what became his studio. And we got together, and then I just basically kind of took him on as an engineer at the time. I was basically giving him like I was paying him to mix the track, and
Yeah.
and then we kind of started to connect as I was doing that, and now we're 3 albums in. So sorry, that was a long fucking answer to a short
No,
question.
John, that's not. Don't worry, we can have another whatever box if we need a meeting box. I don't know. It's a box. It's a laptop.
It's a box,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a box. Yeah, but
So that was that's how it kind of came to be though. And then so sorry, very quickly, as SIIGA has grown, I guess I've kind of I then started to learn how to record. I then started to learn how to produce. I then kind of, and
know
I kind
yourself.
of challenged myself. Yeah, I challenged myself all the time. And I want to get better at writing, or I want to get better at playing this, or I want to try this, or whatever it is. And then I became very interested in recording and then released the See in the Mirror, got a management deal in the state again, just an accident happened and blah, 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 blah. I ended up working out there for a bit. And, so and then Gemini was the sort of follow up, and that record actually was the record that I'm releasing at the moment. That was actually going to be the second record. That wasn't written, but the idea of that was kind of where I was going. And then like some shit happened. My mum got ill and blah blah blah, and I gave up again. I've had these like constant kind of like up on the kind of keel as I
Yeah.
call it, like the boat you're up, and something comes along fucking sideswipes you, and you're like, you know, my mum got cancer, and I quit everything and moved back, and I became her carer for a while, looked after her.
It's normal
Again, didn't think I was going to come back to music,
as well.
but my yeah, so it's been a journey.
No, but it's a. I think I think it's a. You can feel it also in the music. I mean, and it doesn't have to that you have to release an album or something every year or every 2 years. It, it's art. Artists take times when they need times, and they release. Maybe they make art when they need to make art. So
Yeah.
if you came after 3 years with the new music, or you're not like, okay, I'm a metal band, I'm gonna touring around the world, and then just, I think it's mainly for you like putting your soul and your art out there, and then if there is a live or something, it's okay. But like you said, you had the opportunity to be in a live show, to be in a, I don't know,
Yeah,
events in the
yeah,
under the spotlight,
yeah,
and you run away.
yeah,
So I don't think
yeah,
that's what
yeah,
you're interested. I
yeah.
mean, even now you're using a, let's say, an incognito. You're an incognito way out with a new
The
project
robot.
album. Yeah, I mean, the sea and the mirror, Gemini Rising. What is that, the robot? Because it's also always cinematic, because it kind of almost has, these cinematic nostalgic vibes,
Yeah,
but you put it with a futuristic. This is new.
yeah,
How you
yeah.
ended
That's new.
up?
Yeah.
Yeah, how you ended up? Because if you
How
listen
did
to
it end up there? Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
uh,
Well,
uh, 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 that's another story. You should
it's
write.
another story.
It's another
Yeah.
story.
I think the thing for me, Ada, is like I think people think I disappear. And the making, like when I'm not putting music out, I'm living a life in the middle of this incredible experience that I'm getting to have to make these things. Like, you
Okay.
know, so for me, that's the thing that gives me the most pleasure, really. You know, like when I made if I think back on like making the sea in the mirror, it's like I think about being out in that boat. I think about the kind of like
Yeah.
internal sort of journey that I went on, and like I think about how I was like learning to make these sounds, or I was like, it's like a kind of like the
Album of
doing
photographs.
and the
Yeah.
learning. It's amazing. It's like that's, and then for me, I get to the end of like, I mean, this is a running joke between me and my friends. That like every time you finish a record, you just want to fucking set fire to it and go and do something else. You know, it's like, and it's kind of like that. I just sort of, but the making and the kind, because life isn't like for me anyway. It's like I want to just I want to have a rich life, and I don't mean like money. I just it's like it's a
Experience.
rich life of experience and being open to the world and keeping your eyes open and keeping your mind open and speaking to everybody, you know, and so like that's how the music, I guess, like you've got to go out and live a life to have anything worth fucking making and writing and
Yeah.
like putting out there, because otherwise like what the fuck's the point? And I
Yeah.
think like if you're in a situation where you're trying to make something that you have any hope that people will connect with, it's got to be like from a place of like real experience. So
Yeah.
making these records, and like Gemini was the same. I mean, there's a whole world of different things happened when I was making that, and even just the kind of journey I went on personally that through making that album. And I think for me, my only hope really ever has been to hopefully make things that last. That's it, really. You know, it's like if I can make something, and in a way, like I kind of feel that, and I think that's probably why I left all these other projects. And with SIIGA, I was
Yeah.
like,
You're
this is
passionate.
feels like home. It feels like home to me because I feel like I can stand by everything I've made in that. It's like I can go back to Hollow Bones, the first track ever. I made a fucking animation. I didn't have it again, didn't have any money. I was like, how can I make a music video? And then I was like, I locked myself in this empty flat for 3 days with cardboard and paper, and I borrowed a camera. I made this bloody thing with a witch turning it. You know, I was like, just what? But again, it was just the making. It's the making, the making, the making. It's like
You
an
love to
adventure for me, the
learn.
whole thing.
You love to learn it.
Yeah, if I need to kind of be moving all the time. I
Yeah.
need it to be fluid. Like, and if things feel like they're getting sticky or something, and the people I work with, I can only work. I'm very lucky. I've gotten to a point in my life now where I'm, you know, the people that
Always
I
the
work
same
with,
flow.
they're fluid and they kind of just
Yeah.
feel that they understand my kind
Because
of like
they have
process, you know.
they should have this, because I think you can connect and be surrounded by people that have the same, that has the same flow of arts an idea you have, because I think it's
And
something
when that
that also,
happens, it goes
yeah, because I also think it's something that your mom gives you, you know. It,
maybe, yeah. I
these
think I
all
was just never really like I was never really interested in this sort of like celebrity of music. I didn't give a fuck about that. It was always about like imagine making something really cool. Like that was the thing that would make, and it still excites me. You know, it's like I kind of think because then I'm like, okay, what can I do next? But so then the robot kind of stuff and the retro future thing. I mean, that kind of came from. So I'd kind of gone through the See in the Mirror. I came out of that, and then I had this. I'd had this idea actually for Nostalgia Burns quite a long time ago, but then I kind of parked it a wee bit and went off on this journey with Gemini Rising. I was living back in Skye at the time, and I was very much influenced by the kind of color of everything that was happening, and I really plugged in to that kind of.
you know,
I goes. There's this thing that I kind of deal with like when I start a record, the first thing I see is the color that is going to be. So like I knew with that album Gemini Rising, I don't know where it came from, but I had this magenta, purpley kind
okay,
of color in my head,
the
and I was
vivid,
like, yeah, and I was like,
that's Jimi Hendrix.
Jimi Hendrix, maybe, yeah. It was like that's kind of I thought that's where that's going, you know. So and so the same thing happened with Nostalgia Burns. I was watching see this is what I find interesting, and people can think you're fucking crazy, but I don't really care. But the cosmic fucking threads of shit, man, that happen in the world. Like when you start putting your mind into things and then all these sort of things start like thread together, you get into a flow state with for me with making an album, every SIIGA album I've entered, I've started it with this kind of color, and then suddenly I've gone on to it without. I don't plan much. I'm not sitting there with lists of things that I know I'm going to
Yeah,
do with a record. I'm just like, if I show up, some shit's going to happen. Like something's going to happen if I just show up. And so like I kind of like show up, and then suddenly you go on this wave and kind of and you catch it, and it's the best feeling in the world. And so like when you're making these things and you're in the flow of it, and so with Nostalgia Burns, I was watching. I don't know if you know the film. It's an old film called Heat. It was like Robert De Niro,
yeah,
like
Al
Al
Pacino,
Pacino, right?
of course,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I was sitting one evening watching this in the dark, and the opening scene of that film comes on, and there's this soundtrack to it, and it's got this kind of very haunting kind of like there's a guitar strum. I think it's a Michael Mann film, and I can't remember who did the soundtrack. But anyway, there's this kind of sound, and this guitar goes young, and there's this big reverb, and the credits are coming on, and I just watched it, and it was like it was there's always like a kind of spark moment I can
Yeah,
pinpoint to every record I make where I'm like, I'm going to make a fucking album now. I know that's happening. It's just suddenly I'm like, okay, you know, I was sort of waiting. You're just sort of waiting around for the sort of thing to hit you, you know, sort of.
and you
And so
get
I was watching that
yeah.
film, and I was like, wow, how cool. And I just suddenly became really inspired. And there's a scene in the movie, um, and it's the character Neil, who's like Robert De Niro. He's, I think, or is it Al Pacino? I can't remember which one it is. I think it's one of them is in his apartment, and it's looking out onto the Pacific, and it's all blue, and it's based on an old painting, and his gun's on the table, and there's this music going on, and the sound of the sea. And I was just that blue just was like
Yeah,
hit me in the face. And I was kind of like, what's the color of the next record? Now, this is where things get funny because then at that point, this is all this is. I have no songs, I've got no fucking idea what I'm doing. I just know that I'm going to make
just
this
go.
record, right? So I get on this journey. Last September, I'm sitting in a bar in Los Angeles, collaborating with someone who I've met making this fucking robot in the middle of this record, and she takes me to a bar. We finish working on this thing for the day. We decide to go for a drink, and she goes, "Oh, there's a cool bar around the corner. It's called the Blue Room, right?" So we go to it. I'm standing there. I start chatting to the barman, and he says, "Oh, he says that's where John Voight was sitting in Heat when they did that scene." And I was
The
like, "Are you
fuck?
fucking kidding me?" Yeah.
What
And
the
I was
fuck?
like, yeah, yeah. And I was like, you joking? And he's like, no, no, yeah, this they filmed some of Heat, and this is in this fucking bar, and then it's called the Blue, you know. So like, and I was like, all right, man, I'm
Okay,
following
that's a
something
fucking
that I don't know what the fuck's going on. Yeah, and
okay.
I've got a million of these stories in my life, like things like that. So I just think put yourself out in the world. So like going and playing like gigs and all that is great. I love all that.
Of
But
course.
for me, it's a fucking adventure of life that you
Yeah,
go on
these are the
and
amazing things that happen, like the
yeah,
big, smaller coincidence, like if I
yeah,
can find that, that's kind of a sign.
yeah. Yeah, aye. So I end up in the bar, sorry, in Los Angeles. But that, I guess the point of that I was trying to make was that yeah, the adventure of making music is kind of the
Yeah.
thing that get makes me keep coming back to it. Every time I kind of think, oh, maybe I'll stop now doing that, and but then there's always like it's just like something happens, and there's like this little kind of door opens, and I kind of want to go through it and find out what's on the other side,
Yeah.
and then you go off on this kind of adventure. And that's kind of how the robot sort of started because with Nostalgia Burns, the record. I mean, that was quite close to being finished actually before the whole visual thing happened. So I'd started working on the album. I was living in France during all of the fucking COVID and all that shit was
Yeah.
going on. Yeah. So I'd ended up there. Again, that's a whole other story, but so I kind of so I was sort of living off the grid a bit. Ended up in this little village in an area called the Cevennes, which like I was saying to you earlier, I'm going back down actually
Yeah.
this later this year for a bit. But so I ended up living there, and so I didn't have much in the way of music equipment or anything at the time. Got to know a couple of local musicians, and the girl Clara, she played a bit of trumpet and stuff, and her partner had a little band, and they were sort of playing. So I started hanging out with them a little bit, and then she managed to source me a couple of basic instruments. And so I sort of was like, I had a lot of time in my hands. There was all the lockdowns and shit
Yeah.
going on. I was way away from it all and kind of wasn't really. The thing was, we'd just finished doing Gemini Rising. So what had happened was I'd basically see in the mirror I'd done kind of on my own, pretty much. I'd met Ian during the mixing kind of stages of it, and then finished that record. I did a book again. I just went off on these little adventures. I'd kind of made this book with an artist that I met from America at the time who had kind of been interested in my previous kind of life and music and stuff. And we made this book together. And I had this idea in my head it was going to be like a washed up scrapbook that I kind of found on a shore somewhere in Scotland. And it was like this record kind of discovered in it. And that kind of was the sort of companion piece to The Sea in the Mirror. And I'd had all these things I'd been writing at the time, and we put it all in there. So we kind of made this thing. Then I launched it, and then it ended up getting picked up by, at the time, I think it was like BBC Radio Scotland. This is The Sea in the Mirror, and I had a debt
Okay.
to Ian for some of his time because at the time we weren't working together. He was just I'd kind of employed him, if you like, as a engineer, mix engineer, and so that album, when I think about it now, it's crazy. I was like, we were recording like the song in the morning, half because I had no budget. I had fucking like barely any money. So I had enough that I knew Ian was giving me a rate for the day, and it was like we've got to record this song and fucking mix it in one day. And it's like, and so we were recording up until we'd record from like 9 till about 1 o'clock. And then it was like whatever we had, we'd mix it that day. So like that first track, Hollow Bones, I'd had the demo of that, which to be honest sounded very similar to what the final one was, but I came in with that and I played everything on that on my own and I did it. I remember I tracked that whole song, every single part of it in about 4 hours. And then we mixed it that day. And Ian at the time had this old, it was called a Rain Dark desk. It was an old analog console, old fucking thing.
Yeah.
And it had no what we call recall on it, like digital stuff. You can basically press a
Yeah.
button and it'll bring everything back. This thing was literally, it was just, there was nothing like that on it. So we were mixing in the afternoon. And then basically we would have that night to listen to it. We would leave everything with a cover over it so nobody touched the faders or moved
Yeah.
anything, listen to it that night, and then if there was anything slightly needing
Yes.
tweaked, go in the morning because then we would have to clear the desk
Okay.
to start the next track, and it's fucked. You're never going to get it back again. So we'd done The Sea in the Mirror like that. I'd racked up a little bit of a financial debt to Ian, and I didn't like having that. And I was thinking, how the fuck am I going to pay this? Anyway, long story short, he was working on a thing called the Transatlantic Sessions, which was like a BBC thing where they had all these musicians from the States. It was more like kind of folk kind of stuff. And they would have like, songwriters, American kind of very established songwriters would come on. Like they had, I can't remember who they had, folk like Emmylou Harris, these kind of more country kind of like folk kind of people. And then they would have Scottish musicians and they would record it in video and film the whole thing. Anyway, Ian was engineering it and he sent me a message and he said, I'm working on this thing for, I think it was a week or something. And he said, he's like, you could come and work and assist me in engineering. And then basically your rate for that, we can use that money and we'll clear that. Because I'd said to him, I want to get this debt cleared. So I basically was like, right, fuck it, I'll come and work and do that. I remember that week my grandmother fucking passed away, and I went for my mum and I said to her, and she said, "You better go and do this." So I went up, went to her funeral, came back down to Luss. It was up in Loch Lomond, and we did this transatlantic sessions. During that week, I released The Sea in the Mirror, and I just had a very no backing, no fuck all. I wasn't, it was just on my own. But a friend of mine had basically managed to get me a restaurant, which was quite a fancy restaurant in Glasgow at the time, and they agreed to let me use a corner of it to do a little launch. So I did a wee gig in there. Anyway, at the time, the radio picked up on one of the songs, and I was working, and I was just assistant engineering. I had my head down. There's all these musicians coming in, and I was just plugging up mics and fucking about and whatever. And during that week, one of the producers or somebody on the show said, "Is that your song that's getting played on the radio this week?" And so somebody said something to somebody. I never mentioned fuck all. These guys didn't think I could play a note. I was just sitting there, just
Yeah,
doing
just
whatever.
around it.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I didn't even really want to be there. I just wanted to get the debt paid
That
off
kind
and
of,
and
yeah.
and get back to fucking whatever I was doing. And the music that they were all playing didn't interest me anyway. I'm not into that fucking kind of stuff. So it was very Scottish kind of whatever. But so I was just kind of doing the thing. Anyway, through that week, one of the songwriters from the States, she was there and she was the kind of main guest on the show. And she heard this track, blah, 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 blah. We got chatting. She goes back to the America. I go back to whatever I'm doing. About 2 weeks later, I get an email out of the blue from this management company in the States saying, "We've heard this record. Who made this? I did. Who did the artwork? I did. Who did the book? I did. Who did the video? I was like, all right, so you did all of this yourself?" And I was like, pretty much. And so then they said, well, we're working on this stuff with a songwriter. We're thinking maybe you'd want to come over to America to work on production or work on these songs. So anyway, this is a bit of another
I'm
story for another
sorry.
time. But I ended up about a month later in fucking Virginia in a farm in the middle of nowhere working on this music with a songwriter there who became quite difficult, but that's again another story. But
Others-
so this whole other thing kind of I went off on this other sort of side quest again. Now I'm fucking over there and I'm thinking, and so then I ended up in Austin. They flew me to Austin. I went and got a booking agent. So suddenly this project SIIGA that I had no real ambition to make. So again, by accident, I'm like getting this traction. Every time I stop giving a shit, things happen. If I actually try it, it's like closed doors everywhere I look. But if I just go, oh fuck it, then suddenly everyone's like, it's like anyway. So I ended up there and got a deal and with this label, and then they basically said to me, go back to Scotland and learn how to play this music,
Yeah.
cheaply, and come back. So then I came back. Ian, who I'd been
Yeah.
working on the mixing with, I said to him, they're offering me this deal. I don't know what the fuck to do with it. What do I do? And I said, do you want to? And I was like, do you want to play? And he's like, yeah. So he started learning. Poor Ian was then having to learn how to play all this fucking shit that I'd been making. Like because I was making that record, never even thinking I was going to play it live or anything. It was just I was layering up all these parts and couldn't remember how I did any of it because everything I do, I just do it once. If you don't catch it, I'll never remember how to do it twice. So it was just like all this shit that I'd done. So then I sort of, so then I gave myself the easy job of just playing the acoustic guitar and fucking piece
Again.
of cake. And I was like, can you learn how to do all that other shit that I did? And so, and do you know what, man? He's such a fucking genius. He was like an octopus. He would have a keyboard. He was playing the guitar. He was like triggering samples. And he was doing all, and then the two of us got on a plane and we flew back over to America and they stuck us on a couple of showcases. We played in New York twice. I've got a funny fucking story about that as well. But anyway, so we
It's
ended up
another.
in yeah for another day. I ended up with my. I'll tell you it quickly. I basically get to first gig in America. We're supposed to be like arriving. We're in Williamsburg, fucking some hipster like venue.
Okay.
It was like this thing that they'd kind of some random shit happened actually. A guy from fucking Lewis walked in who was about to row across the whole of the Atlantic for it was a fucking mad day. So anyway, we get
Jesus.
to New York and we actually arrived at the airport and they picked us up in a car and all that. And Ian was like, what have you been doing over here? Like I was like, so, so then they like took us and they stuck us in a hotel just off Times Square.
Okay.
In fact, I went out for a walk and I ended up going through a side door and I ended up in at the time David Letterman show was going. I walked in and the guy he said, "You want to see it?" And there were all these like mafia guys like they took me in and I've got a picture of myself sitting in David Letterman's like fucking desk. I just walked out. That's what I mean. Life is interesting. Just talk to
Yeah,
people, man, and shit happens. So
exactly.
anyway, so we're there. We go to play this first gig. Fuck, you were asking me about a robot. Sorry, but anyway, the we go to play this gig in this venue. We turn up, and I'm saying Ian and I are not cool guys. We're just like fucking, So I was like, look, man, we're in New York. We're supposed to be like fucking doing this thing. It's all gonna be trendy and whatever, like fucking from Sky. So anyway we get in there and there's a sound engineer and he was just a classic indie
Um,
club sound engineer, just a fucking
yeah.
arsehole of a guy. He didn't care. He was like, and he just was not interested in what we were doing at all.
Automotive.
And just a dick. So anyway, but whatever. Like, so I was there and we were like kind of sound checking. And he's like, hey, can I hear the guitar? And I'm like, yeah, no problem. So I was like, had my acoustic guitar with me. And I had it rigged up to all this shit because we were trying to make this big ethereal
Yeah.
haunting sound. So we'd kind of been triggering off all this stuff to try and make it sound like the album. Anyway, sorry, the point was I went to play my guitar and I'm like, and he's like, I'm not hearing anything. And I'm like, and my guitar's just going brum, brum, and I'm thinking, oh my God, it's been fucked in the plane or something's happened to it, and I
Yeah.
was getting a bit panicky because it was like we only had about 10 minutes to sound check and all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And Ian's got all this shit around him. He's trying to get, and I'm saying to Ian, I was like, guitars, what the hell's going on? Anyway, I went like, I says, it's all right, hang on. I said, realize what. So we had a really limited budget to travel.
Okay.
We didn't have much, and we had to take all our shit with us.
Really.
So what I'd done, this is a very non-rock star story. So I'd basically gone, I went, sorry, I started pulling my underpants out of the guitar.
You wouldn't fucking know.
So, because we had no space, I forgot. I stuck them in the fucking guitar.
Thank you for the tip. If I have to travel and I put it inside
So I
that
was like that, pulling fucking socks and shit out. And the guy was like that, looking at me like, what? And Ian was like this, and I was like,
I'm a
fucking hell,
magician.
man.
I'm a magician.
Yeah, exactly, a magician. So that was my first gig in America. I fucking arrived with my pants inside my guitar. But so anyway, we ended up playing. We got flown to Los Angeles. I got offered a record deal in Los Angeles, and this guy Bill Bentley showed up, and he was like Neil Young's guy back in the
Okay.
day, and Lou Reed, and that's really. And it was kind of at the advent, like record deals were starting to change. When I was growing up, that was like the ambition. Everyone's like, "You got to get a record deal. You got to get a record deal." Now I don't think it fucking matters. Actually, we've just set up this one we're doing on our own label. But anyway, at the time, it was kind of like the music industry was just kind of transitioning. People didn't really know what the fuck was going on. Streaming was kind of starting, and it was no one really knew. And so labels were starting to ask for more. Like back in the day, they had nothing to do with your merchandise. They had this new thing at the
Yeah,
time. They
that's
called it a
true.
360. Yeah, so they like had this thing where they called it a 360 deal, which was essentially they were just going to loop everything into the deal.
Yeah.
And a record deal is basically just a fucking glorified bank loan. I mean, like the label never loses. They just kind of spread bet on stuff, and if one comes really good, then they'll write off other stuff. So I got offered this deal with this relatively big label in LA at the time, and my manager at the time, Chris, had kind of come out, and we kind of played this show, and it was all very glamorous and all of that. But I kind of came back and I thought it doesn't feel right to me. It was a very old-fashioned deal, and it kind of
Mhm.
felt very restrictive. And I wasn't writing hits. I'd put out a album, The Sea in the Mirror. It wasn't like there was some fucking viral song or anything on it. It was just a very long kind of ambient kind of record. And I had enough self-awareness to be like, I don't think I'm writing the kind of music these guys are looking for. This could be quite a bad idea for me because I've just kind of spent my life trying to come out of that shit. So I came back to Scotland, and anyway, long story short, again, I spoke with my management at the time who were in Denver, and I said, I don't think I want. And to be fair to them, they were great in the sense they weren't pushing for that. He was like, just whatever you feel like you want to do, like we'll go with that. And he's like, how are you feeling? I said, I don't really think that's for me, that deal. And we kind of knocked it back and forth a bit, and they backed down on some stuff and whatever. But then in the end, I just kind of was like, it doesn't feel right. So in the end, I ended up going with Chris's label, and it was a little label in Denver, and we released Gemini. So I went then, sorry, and he was like, right, well, went to work on the second record, and so that became Gemini Rising. Sorry, this is going to lead up to the robot, but basically, um, that was the Gemini Rising was the kind of record that I had a backing behind me suddenly, and it was the first time I had a bit of like kind of sort of scope to kind of try some things out. And suddenly I went in, and that album was recorded all in the studio. It wasn't like some of it done at home like the
Yeah.
previous one. And so I suddenly had all this kind of music in my head that I thought, oh, I can try this. And, and in a way it was lucky because I was writing these long pieces of music, and, the fucking album's called Gemini Rising. And like, it was talking about, I became obsessed with like the moon phases, and I was
Yeah.
kind of like, all this kind of stuff
All
started
related.
happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like, so then I finished that. This was going to lead me up to how this. So we kind of started working on that record, and that was going to be the one that sort of the label were getting behind, and we were going to sort of push. And then in the middle of that, my fucking mum gets ill, and all that stuff starts happening, and that was a bit of a kind of. And so I sort of Gemini Rising was sort of partly finished, and then I just said to everybody around me, look, I'm done. I'm going back. I'm going to move into my mum's house, and I'm going to look after her, and that's it. And however long it takes, this is it. And I just left it all. And anyway, so she passed away eventually, and all of that happened. And I just didn't feel like coming back to it. I actually thought at that time, I thought, I think I'm kind of done because not to get too heavy about it, but a lot of my kind of connection to music was kind of through my mum, really, and sort of she was almost like a sort of silent band member to me. If I had a song, I would let her hear it, or if I had an idea, I would, like, what do you think of this? And suddenly, like, she wasn't there anymore, and I was kind of like, what the fuck's the point in this? Like, there's not no fun in this. There's nobody to sort of, you kind of do these things to sort of impress your, it's like it
Yeah,
was like
I
I
know
wasn't.
everything.
I could get a review, it's
You
nice,
will be
but if
the
my
first,
mum
yeah.
says it's nice, it's different. You know what I mean? It's like
That's
it
for
doesn't matter what
them.
anyone
Yeah.
else says. Yeah. So, and then so I sort of fell out of it a bit, and then I stayed up in Sky. And to be honest with you, I kind of just went off the radar. I didn't really keep in touch with anybody. I just disappeared for a while and tried to sort of rebuild life a little bit, I guess, and my
Yeah.
personal circumstances and everything else that was going on. I just kind of kept working on all of that and just sort of switched off everything. And then Chris, who had been managing me at the time, kind of got in touch, and he says, "What are you doing with this album? Are you going to finish it? Are you going to put it out? What's the plan?"
Yeah.
And I said, "I don't know. I just don't know if I feel like it." And he was like, "Well, let's meet up. I'm going to be in London." And I'd been through a million of these different fucking meetings with labels, and like we're going to meet at. So I just couldn't be bothered. I said, "I tell you what, if you want to meet, why don't you come up to Sky and come and meet me here?"
Yeah.
And to be fair to him, he fucking did it. He flew from Denver and he went
Okay.
to London, got a fucking taxi from one airport to the other, and came up. And I went and picked him up in Inverness, and he came off the plane. I hadn't seen him for ages. And he had like a fucking, he's a funny guy anyway, but he didn't have a cowboy hat on, but it was about 90% close to being a fucking cowboy
Yeah,
hat.
but that's
And
to be
he,
honest.
Yeah, and he came off the plane and it was all backlit. The sun was going down. It was like once upon a time in the fucking West, and I was like, he had a big duster coat on and that. It just kind of came in. I
Once
was like,
upon
what
a
the hell are
time
you?
in Sky.
Yeah, and he was like, fucking. I said, what the fuck are you up to with this? And he's like, what are you up to? He says, up here, you know. And so he kind of came up and we had a bit of time together. We went and took some hikes and stuff, and he kind of convinced me to kind of come out of my seclusion, if you like, and release this record. So I kind of got my shit together, and then Ian and I got back together, and we finished it off, and then we were just getting ready to launch, and then fucking COVID comes along, you know, and it's like, for fuck's sake. So, you know, it just kind of gotten back to sort of getting going again, and then this shit starts. And I remember I was actually in Skye at the time when that all started, and I was up and it was snowing actually, and I was with a guy. I was actually chatting to a guy from South Africa who had never seen snow in his life, and we were having a conversation, and he said to me, "Have you seen the news with this COVID thing?" And I says, that's like fucking whatever,
Yeah,
man. I was like, it's just another fucking thing. I says, it'll be
perfect.
over in two. Yeah, I was like, it'll be over in 2 weeks, man.
Yeah,
Don't
it
worry
starts
about it. Yeah,
the
was I
moment.
wrong? But so anyway, then that all kind of kicked off just as we were about to launch the thing. And then so I remember speaking to the guys in Denver and the States and said, look, do you want to delay this? And they were like, nah, just do it. Just release. Let's just release it. So we released the record. Then all
Restrict.
these
Yeah.
restrictions came in. I wasn't, if I'm honest with you, I didn't agree with a lot of it. You know, I was kind of like not really up for a lot of that. Whatever, like that's a whole other kind of discussion. But I was sort of feeling like I was like, this is getting a bit fucking mental. Like people need to
Yeah.
calm down a bit here. And and then that was happening. Brexit was on the horizon at the time as well. I wasn't agreeing with that either. I was getting a little bit pissed off. I was maybe still feeling a bit pissed off with the world because I just like had to deal with my mom.
Yeah.
Fucking the
Yeah, a lot
medical
of,
system had,
yeah.
yeah, and the medical system had failed her, and so I didn't have much faith in it anyway. So ended up going fuck this. End up in France. So I was like, get the fuck out of here. And so then got stuck there, which was nice actually, you know. But and ended up in the middle of nowhere, and that's how Nostalgia Burns started. Sorry, so basically, I was out kind of there, spending all this time, and I thought, so we released the record. I couldn't travel or do fuck all. There was no
What
touring
you can
behind it
do.
because it was just yeah. So we just had our kind of launch online, and we did all of that, and we got some good support, and it got out. I was surprised at how far out
Yeah.
and
I
how
mean,
it
arrive
got.
here in Sicily.
Well, exactly, yeah. I mean, and I still, you know, and that's kind of going back to earlier at it. For me, like, as long as you're making things at the time,
No, good luck.
people get fixated just now that they think you got to release a song, and if it doesn't do anything in 2 days, it's like move on. Like, I don't, that's a fucking silly attitude, man.
Well,
It takes forever to make that stuff. Music is timeless. Like, first time I heard like Jimi Hendrix or that, it wasn't new. It was old music, but to me, it was new, and it was like fucking hell, this is amazing, you know, and that happens to me all the time. I hear music that, you know, so to me, I'm like, when I release a song, I just think about, oh, I wonder where that's going to end up someday or wherever, you know, and it's
yeah,
like, so I get messages all the time from people like
that, yeah,
saying, just found your music, you know, and
yeah. When
so
I
we
found
put
your,
Gemini out and in the middle of all of that, and that was fine. We did that, and then to be honest with you, things between me and kind of the label side of it sort of got a little bit separated because of different opinions, I suppose, and
yeah,
how the world was being kind of handled at that time and things like that. And so, you know, I just think everyone needs people lost a bit of just basic respect for one another during that time, which I
for
kind of
sure, like,
struggled with, you know. Yeah. So anyway, moving on, I ended up working on. I was had all this time in my hands, and so I had these songs. I was messing around with them. That's what I was saying. I'd met Clara in this village who'd get lent me these instruments. I started kind of working on some ideas that I had, but I was using the bass a lot. I kind of got back
okay.
into that, and so like that track, the first two tracks that we've put out there, there's a lot. They're quite bass heavy, and you know, so and Ian and I had done some demos of some ideas way back as well, and there was just stuff floating around, and then I had this idea in my head, this nostalgia burns thing had kind of title had kind of come to me, and it was a sort of idea, theme in my head of like nostalgia burns had a sort of couple of different meanings to me. It was like I felt at the time that we were living in, there was a nostalgia almost like burning
Yeah,
inside people. They had this nostalgia that they wanted to kind of regress and go back to a simpler
exactly.
time, or like everyone always says, oh, when I was young, things were better. There was that thing, but also nostalgia, like, you know, I've got some, I've seen alcoholism up close, let's just say that. And the, I kind of can say that sometimes if somebody's trapped within that kind of
Yeah.
what should we say, prison of alcoholic kind of thing, they can live in nostalgia. That often when
Yeah.
you're kind of in that, and you just sit there kind of in a sadness and a melancholy, and I kind of was like, nostalgia can also be something. Living in nostalgia can be a dangerous thing. So it's like it burns, like it can burn you. You can just end up living in the past and never focusing on the future. So I was
Exactly.
sort of percolating with that sort of theme in my head, and I guess I was sitting there feeling like I was at a junction point where I thought there's an unknown future ahead for me just now. And there's all this fucking crazy life I've lived up until now. And I feel like I've got one foot on either side of that. And I was kind
Yeah.
of, and I landed in this village in the middle of nowhere in rural France. And I was forced to pause and kind of almost like kind of have a real heavy period of reflection and things about life and the world and the way I felt about the world. And so I just started kind of working on some ideas and then came back to Scotland. Hadn't seen Ian for a long time, and I went to the studio, and he was like, "Have you been working on anything?" And I was like, "Nah, not really much." I was like, "Oh, this is, whatever." And I sat down, and he was at his piano. He's an amazing piano player, and I just started playing him some ideas. And anyway, we sat for, I think, feel like it was maybe an afternoon or something. And he turned around and he says, "You've got like 22 new songs here." And I'm like, he's like, and I was like, I guess so, and
Yeah.
so, and then he was like, what do you think, and I was like, well, I guess and so it was at that point I thought, well, maybe I'll do a record again. I thought, fuck it, let's go again and see what happens. And then the Heat thing, and I watched the film, blah, blah, blah. So we start working on the record, and I kind of at the time had been sort of like, over the last years, I'd gotten really interested. I'd been kind of collecting old vintage synthesizers and things like that when
Okay.
I could find them. There was a time where you could pick these things up very cheaply. Now, not so much.
Very
But for a
expensive.
time there, people didn't. Yeah, but people for a time had moved on. They wanted to use computers. I've never really used digital
Yeah.
stuff. I don't really like it, to be honest with you. And all these so I was managing to collect these old machines that people didn't really want, I guess, at the time. And then I was building up on that, and suddenly now these things are like worth money again. So I was kind of messing around with that stuff. And I grew up listening to sort of a lot of like 80s music anyway, and that kind of thing. And I kind of felt like I said to Ian, I was like, "Ah, fuck it, I'm done with the acoustic guitar. I'm not doing another acoustic record. I can't be fucked, man." I was like, I can make a noise now again. So it's like I can kind of do
Have to
something
change
else.
something,
Yeah. So I was like, I says, let's
something to
just put
stimulate
that
your
in
mind.
its put the acoustic guitar in the box. I'm going to pick the electric guitar up again. I hadn't picked it up in a long time. Picked up like, just everything. I kind of got back into that kind of thing. I was using like a drum machine to kind of make demos and bits and bobs and things like that for myself. And I was just working away, and I started working on this record. And so I started kind of going through, like, I thought I just kind of put my mind in this headspace of like old classic albums. And for whatever reason, maybe it's
Yeah.
arrogant, but I thought I want to make a record that feels like this kind of old classic that was missed, like it just never fucking got
Okay.
found. It was maybe of that time or something, but it was like, but it also had this feeling of being way off in the future. I remember we were working on the album. In fact, one of the engineers that works with Ian, he's from Italy actually, Andrea, and he
Okay.
would walk past the studio one afternoon. I remember when we were recording, we were working in the middle of one of the tracks, and he was making coffee outside in the
Go.
tea room, but and fucking Italians and their coffee. And he says, but he's been in Glasgow. I mean, he's pretty much got a Scottish accent now, but I think he's been there forever. But he turned around and said to me, he's like, "What is that you're recording in there?" He's like, it's sounding pretty cool, man. What is that you're working on?" I said, "Oh, it's new SIIGA record." "What's the vibe?" And I says, "Star Wars?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I I was like, well, like in Star Wars, there's like the fucking Millennium Falcon spaceship. And he's like, uh-huh. I says, and that thing, technology wise, is from like another future, way, 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 way beyond us. And he's like, yeah. I says, but when you go in the cockpit, it's like an old fucking TV screen that looks like it's from the fucking 80s.
Okay.
He's like, uh-huh. I said, it's that, but it's in music. It's like if you can figure it out.
It's
And I
a,
was like, I'm trying to make a record that feels like it's got all this old technology and this old
yeah,
vibe and this old kind of melody and this kind of like what used to make records classic. But I wanted to fucking put this twist, SIIGA twist on it, if you like, that made it sound like it could be beyond another fucking future. So all of that was going on. I was messing around with a vocoder with my voice, like the old bands like Kraftwerk and these guys used to
yeah,
use these
exactly.
things.
Yeah.
So I was using that. I was messing around with that, and I had these melodies I was making with this vocoder. Ian actually was responsible for me kind of really leaning into the vocals. I really opened up. I went back to singing how I used to sing when I was kind of younger before I had to make
Yeah.
things weren't so quiet. So I kind of suddenly realized I had these two voices. I'd kind of had this voice from when I was young, when I was in these rock bands that I was able to really rip into that I'd kind of like pushed to the side because of the noise thing. And I started doing this gentle
Wow.
stuff on
Yeah.
Gemini. But then with this one, I thought, actually, I can do both now. I was like, I
Yeah.
fucking do that and I can do that. And so we kind of started messing around with that. And he was like, I said to him, do you think this? And he's like, yeah, man, just some of the vocal
Really.
stuff we were doing, I was ripping into it. And again, with the guitar and things like that. And so I'll tell you what, Ada, I need to be a little bit careful with what I tell you about the robot because the robot,
It's a mystery.
to me, is a mystery even. I don't know where it's from.
Okay. You know where it's from.
It looks like I mean, it looks like it's from the future, and somehow it
That's for
seems that
sure.
it's for sure, yeah. And somehow it seems to have, I'm, I don't know, I'm some version of me is inside this thing, I think, but yeah, it's a
Okay.
mystery. The robot, yeah, the robot came. There's a lot to be said about the robot. I haven't even started to really tell the story of it yet. I mean, the record was the record was nearly finished. And yeah, I mean, where the fuck to even start? The record was nearly finished, and I mean, I'm big on visuals, as you know.
Um,
Like, we were talking about that earlier, but the like I'll always do all my own visuals for each record. So like with all the first two Sega records, I was doing all of the artwork and everything as well. So I kind of tend to sort of do the whole thing as a package. I kind of view the artwork of a record and the
Already,
visuals
yeah.
as important as the music in some ways. It feels part
Yes.
of the same world. I've never really understood why people just hand that over to somebody else, but because it feels like part of that same thing. But anyway, with the robot, I mean, there's a kind of glamorous version of the robot, and then there's the non-glamorous version of the robot. So, like
Okay.
the non-glamorous version of the how the robot started was actually like most things with me, where I've got an idea and I can't find anybody else who knows how to do it, so I just end up trying to do it myself. So, and I was also a bit pissed off with certain things in the world, so I basically had gotten to the end of the record we were making. Like I said to you, the whole kind of retro future thing had been filtering into the recording process. We'd been using these old synthesizers, old equipment, but I was trying to put this twist on it. I was conveying all of that to Ian, and he was really understanding that. And so he was like kind of, Ian plays on a lot of this, well, all of it with me. Mostly piano and kind of pad synthesizers, and then I'll kind of take care of the rest with it. And he'd kind of really been, I'd been giving him all these references of things that I'd been kind of into. So I was talking about this kind of retro future thing from the very start of the record on a musical side. I was like, I wanted it to feel like I wanted you to listen to that album, almost feel like, have I heard that before somewhere? Is it old? Is it new? What is it? Is it
Yeah.
something, And so I was kind of dropping all these little Easter eggs, I call them, into the tracks of like things that I kind of liked and stuff that I liked growing up. I kind of felt like with the first two SIIGA albums, I'd really gone so kind of I didn't give a fuck about any commercial aspect of them. So I was like,
Yeah. Okay.
I'd just gone
Okay.
off, I'd just really gone off and kind of tried to do, not even tried, just gone with what felt natural at the
Yeah.
time. And it had kind of been these really, I feel like those albums don't sound like anybody else, really. They're just like their own things, quite a unique sound in that sense. So it was coming from a very spontaneous kind of place. So with this one, I was like, do you know what, man? I've kind of I've written a lot of songs, I've made a lot of music. I can afford to just like have a little nod to things and kind of take stuff in a wee bit here now. So I was like kind of listening, I was kind of reflecting on a lot of the stuff I liked. I was playing guitar, I was kind of like just yeah, there was a lot of influences, if you like, that I was kind of not so afraid to sort of let come through. And they were mostly from like stuff I'd listened to growing up in the 80s. And there was kind of all this kind of stuff, like
Yeah.
hand muting guitars and things like that. I was doing a lot of that. And so anyway, and the songwriting process had been, I felt like I was writing good songs. I thought they were good songs. I was feeling like I'd really pushed, like kind of, like I'd pushed myself quite hard on it lyrically and stuff like that, and I was
Yeah.
kind of feeling good about that. So as this sort of album was kind of getting more and more close to being done, I was bringing, I had this the heat thing going back to that
Yeah.
for a second. I had this idea that I wanted saxophone on this record from a very early stage. And I remember having Ian will kill me for saying this, but I remember there was like a conversation in the show, and I said to him, like, because we had that song Recovery, and I said, I want saxophone on it. I was like,
Yeah.
and he was like, really kind of like, do you think, he's like, do you not think, he's like, do you not think it'll sound a bit sleazy? And I says, fucking hopefully. I was like,
That's what I want.
I was like, I was like, oh, yeah, that's what I want. I was like, I want this like smoky, fucking sexy kind of sound on it, And so he like then, because Ian's got this sort of like he records with a lot of people. He kind of was like, I know the guy for it. If you want saxophone, and you got this guy Conrad, who's just amazing guy, fucking great guy, great energy of him, amazing saxophone. So he came in. So I'd been like kind of wanted to. There was all these like things that I'd always wanted to kind of like little kind of treats to myself almost like
Yeah.
where I was like, I want a bit of sax, but you know what, if that's a bit cheap, I want to write a real fucking old school 80s love ballad. Fuck it, I'm gonna do it, or whatever. Like, I'm gonna like sort of was just doing all these things. And so with the robot, I'd kind of said to Ian, I want this visual. I was like, I've kind of got this idea in my head, this visual kind of thing where it's like real retro future thing, where it's like kind of almost very much like leaning into old 80s movies, like you said, and kind of like the nostalgia of that, really, and just this whole kind of thing. And in my head, to be honest with you, I'd sort of imagined this record was like this thing that lived in my attic from when I was a kid or something, like, and it had been buried in there, and it was like full of all the stuff that I'd grown up with, like the music that I'd
Okay.
heard on the radio, the films that I'd seen, and were
It's
just
all
fucking
the,
like,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. So like all
Blinks.
that treasure.
Yeah.
So that was sort of where I was at with it. And so I kind of almost sort of thought to myself, it'd be cool to have like and because again, going back to our conversation way back, because I don't particularly enjoy the kind of idea of being, hey guys, I'm this musician and look at me, and I fucking don't care about that. And I knew that I would have social media to deal with again, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I was like,
The
fucking
thing
hell,
you
I don't
love
have
the
to go back
most.
and yeah, I was like, I have to fucking go back on that. And I was like, so then I was sort of in the studio, and I said to Ian one afternoon, I said, wouldn't it be cool to have like I says, I would love to have a character that I can
Okay.
like have, that I could be fucking everywhere, but I don't have to be fucking there anymore. And it was like kind of
Yeah.
that was the sort of start of it. And he was like, "What do you mean?" I says, "I don't know, like I don't know, like a fucking robot or something." I was like,
You came up
and
having
he
a
was,
conversation.
yeah, I was like something like that, and then I said to him, I says, "I've kind of got this idea now." During the whole COVID stuff had been going on, and not to get political about it, but a few friends of mine were like, "Oh, you're a fucking tinfoil hat wearer," because I was being skeptical.
Yeah.
It's this thing people say here, like conspiracy theorist, or whatever. They say
Yeah.
you
That's
wear a
what
tinfoil hat.
yeah.
So I was getting some of that shit, whatever. It was in a friendly way, and I thought, you want a fucking tinfoil fucking hat? I'll give you one. I'll get a box, and I was going to get a cardboard box, and I was going to wrap it in tinfoil, and I was going to put wires and shit, and just make it into this
It
really
was
shitty looking
from
fucking robot head.
from the future.
And I thought, I'll just do that. And I'll fucking put a box on my head. I'll wrap tinfoil around it, and I'll just walk around in fucking Sky and video myself, and that'll do, right? I was like, that'll do. And then people can say what they like. So that was the sort of start of it. And then, fucking hell, then it was like, you talk about like cosmic kind of like lightning bolts. So I sort of thought to myself, well, I can't do that. That's going to look shit. I thought I need to maybe get somebody who knows how to make some
Yeah.
stuff. So I know quite a few people in Scotland who work in like film and stuff like that. So I kind of started sending a couple of messages out to some people, and I said, so it's a bit weird idea. I was like, I've got, but you don't know anybody who would know how to kind of make. And originally I'd thought I wanted to have this pixelated kind of thing happening, and to be honest with you, I mean, I don't want to start like shitting on my own country, but people in Scotland are a bit not too fucking like they're quite
Open-minded.
narrow in their they're sort of a bit narrow in that sense, I find anyway, and particularly for me because I don't live in that Scottish music world.
Yeah.
I don't know what the fuck world I live in my own wee planet maybe, but it's like
Future.
but in the future, yeah. So I sort of sent a couple of messages out to a few people, and I was getting a kind of lukewarm, oh yeah, I don't really know it, and I was just like, oh, you're definitely not the person I'm looking for, I need yes people,
Yeah,
and
that's my
so
phone also.
so I'd had this conversation randomly through with this person who had bought my music, and it had been like I don't know, a year or so before, maybe. I don't know. I can't remember the timeline of it. Anyway, long story short, Sarah Mjani, who is like the person who basically built that thing, she's a absolute one. She's become like one of my closest fucking pals now through this process. But two, she's like just a fucking genius. And I kind of felt like I'd met my match, like in the sense of like
Yeah.
somebody who was as fucking mental as I am about about making things. And so she had kind of she'd bought Gemini Rising. I only found this out afterwards, actually. She'd heard this shows you the power of like not worrying about
Yeah.
whether your song does well in the first day. She'd heard a song that I wrote called La Luna on the radio in Los Angeles in her car one day and Shazammed the song and
Okay.
then found the record, bought my record, and then had sent me this lovely message, which often people will do, is just so nice, saying, found your album, da, da, da. And I oftentimes will write back and say, how did you find it? Because I'm kind of curious, like, where the fuck, how did it end up there? So anyway, I don't know, even remember how she did it. She'd mentioned something about the fact she worked in film or something, and that was about as much as she'd said. And it wasn't even a long, it was just a literal back and forth, hi and bye kind of thing. And that was it. For whatever fucking reason, that came in somewhere in the back of my head. I kind of went, oh, there was
I knew
that
something.
person. Yeah, and I didn't know who she was, didn't know fuck all about her. And I just thought, that woman, Sarah, mentioned she worked in film. I thought, fuck it, it's worth a shot. So I sent her a message. I was like, this might sound a bit strange, but at that time I didn't realize who I was talking to. So I said, this might sound a bit strange. I've got this idea for this robot. I was like, I've got this kind of idea of this character. Da, 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 da. I says, you wouldn't know anybody that would maybe know roughly anything about that kind of thing. She sends me a message back and says, I would know how to do that. And I'm thinking, right?
Yeah.
And, people tell you bullshit all the time. So I kind of thought, okay. And then I said, right, and she goes, it's kind of what I do, sort of thing. I'm sort of paraphrasing, but it was along those lines. And I said, all right. And I'm like, what is it you do? And she goes, well, I actually work in film and TV, in costume, and I work in the department that she said, she called them super suits for superhero films and superhero shows. And then she said, have you heard of a TV show called The Boys? Now, I hadn't heard of it, to be honest with you, because I'm not big on I like old TV, but I don't
Yeah.
really watch much new stuff. And she said, it's on Amazon Prime. And I'm thinking, right. And she says, it's a kind of superhero show. She says, I work in the department that creates these costumes, for these things. And she referenced Scotland. So anyway, the next day I was going to the studio, and again, all these things kind of weaving.
All
So I
into
was going to the studio. I was going to finish. We were working on. I can't remember what song it was, but we were going to. I was going to the studio, and I was getting the train into town. to meet Ian, and I was at the station not far from here, and it was a shitty Scottish grey day, fucking just crap weather. I had my headphones on, I had music on, and I was thinking about fucking living in France or something. And I was like walking down the street, and I kind of got to the crossing at the traffic lights, and I stopped for the traffic, and I'm looking around, and I went, "What the fuck is that?" And there was a huge, big billboard,
On
you
the
know, like a big,
boys.
massive billboard, fucking, and it just said "The Boys," and it had all these people like that, like
Yeah,
superheroes in a row. Out now, Amazon Prime season fucking whatever, right? And I'm like, "The Boys."
I heard that.
It's like, nah. I was like, it can't be the same thing. So I was like, take a photo of it. I was like, is this the thing that you're talking about?
The show.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm like, right, hang on a minute. I'm like, fucking hell, she works on that. And she's like, so anyway, I said, right, okay, let's have a sort of chat. She's like, what is it you're thinking? So I then said to her something in the long lines, and this is going back to my Jimi Hendrix, Bowie
I
influences
knew
and
it.
whatever.
And
So, so I said to her, I said, well, actually, I kind of want to make this character that's like this kind of like, I says, a sort of robot. I said, but I want him to be fucking like a kind of like mixture of like Ziggy Stardust, Prince, Jimi Hendrix. Fucking, he's got an amazing outfit. It's all colors and purples and pinks and whatever else. And he's like this, and he's like mixed up with like Evil Knievel, fucking stuntman kind of like thing. And he's like, he's got a story and he's from the future and da da da. And she kind of was like, within like 2 days, she sends me a fucking email and she put the password on it. I won't say what it was, but it was a Phil Collins song was the password. And I thought she's fucking on the same fucking
please.
frequency I
Yeah.
am, man. And she says, I've done a mood board for it. And so I open up this thing and she's done this whole thing and she's got all these pictures and things she's put in and
Wow.
there's this robot and I'm like, fuck. Anyway, honestly, after that, we got a call like this. We started chatting. We started talking about kind of our childhoods, both of us, all of the things that we were into. And at the time, what was happening was there was the whole actor strike was happening in Hollywood. Now she
Yeah.
works in Hollywood and works in
Yeah,
that
yeah, I
whole
remember.
world, and so she was actually kind of she had her work had stopped,
Yeah.
so it was right place, right time. Now I'd shopped this idea around in Scotland, got fucking nowhere with it because people just I don't think they could understand what I was talking about actually. And so suddenly I'm chatting to this person that I've met through, you know, these kind of weird kind of threads, and we're chatting about this. And I said to her, look, I said, this is not a big project. And she's like, nah, I love it. Let's do it. You know, and I was like, let's make something. And she said, I've got the time. Let's just do it. And so Sarah and I went on this fucking wild journey. It took us we were at that in silence, didn't tell anybody about it for like 11 months, just video calls. And Sarah made that robot. I mean, this is the first I've really talked about it. At some point, I'm going to really kind of talk properly about it. But I mean, it's a work of art, this thing. And so she made it from the scratch. That everything you see on that thing, that's like that was just sheets of fabric. I mean, I've got samples lying in my window that she sent me. She's made everything. She from complete scale. She's an absolute artist, and I mean, she's hilarious and fucking just such a creative. And we just had such. It was a fucking laugh. We just laughed throughout the whole time, like, and just kind of. So I just would be going in and recording. I was sort of mentioning it. I was saying to Ian, I'm working on this robot, and he's like, "What?" I says, "You'll see." I just wait, you know, and it kind of. I was in a pub in Skye, and I'd sort of let it. I was a bit pissed one night, and I started talking about I'm making a robot, and I could tell it was like, yeah, yeah, whatever, you know, kind of thing. I was like, fucking, I'm making a robot. You see this fucking thing? It's amazing. And so it's like, so then kind of like started running it. So Sarah starts building the robot, we started chatting about it. Then we kind of went off. I mean, she went off. Every time it was kind of like every time I had an idea that I thought was crazy,
About.
she came back with a bigger one. And then another one. And it's like, right, he needs to have a fucking watch. She's built a watch. He's fucking everything works on him. Like, then I was like, do you think we could have his eyes light up? And she's like, so I'd been talking to her about that whole thing about how I see color in music. And so she took that and then said, well, what if we actually have his whole head light up? And then so
Yeah.
He made that whole thing. It's a fully wearable outfit. The lights, you can control the lights. There was a guy called Corey, amazing guy that I met. He did all the wiring. So she roped in friends. They were all on, and so I'd had a real, I mean, this again, another conversation right now, but I was getting really pissed off with hearing about people talk about AI and about saying that,
Yeah.
that oh, AI will write your songs, AI will make your art. Yeah, it probably will, but I was just like, fucking bullshit. I was like, I thought the way that we kind of talked together, I said to Sarah, I was like, I said, maybe this is the last fucking time we're going to make anything, maybe this is the last time we're going to make music, the last time we're going to make it because of all this fucking bullshit that's coming in. I was like, well, do you know what? Let's fucking do it with a bang and let's just do something that is like really about the kind of what humans can do together.
Exactly.
And so I kind of kept talking about it like a Trojan horse. Like I was like, let's make this kind of like Trojan horse, this kind of thing that we can put out there and then deliver this fucking message and like underneath it, and
Yeah.
like and sort of, and that was kind of what like the track, the LCD, the first release. Like, I mean,
Was.
like I hadn't released a song in like 4 years. A fucking first single I put out has got a chorus that goes destabilize, dehumanize. I mean, it's like the Armageddon, But I
Yeah.
kind of I wanted to dress it up in this kind of clothing of like this kind of poppy, kind of hooky, sparkly kind of thing where almost you're listening to the song and you're not really thinking about it's quite dark, the song, to be honest, and quite bleak. I don't tend to write bleak music, but that was very much just like this digital Armageddon. But I thought if I put it in this kind of package of just something that's almost like just gets stuck in your head and you're almost like kind of dancing into this fucking incinerator,
I don't know
like you're
what the
not knowing
music
what's
is
going
dark,
on.
the dark thing.
Yes. So we started working on the robot, and then anyway, we
Just
started getting to the end of it, and then we were like, "What the fuck are we going to do with it?" And I'd had all these ideas in my head of what I wanted to do, and so Sarah and I, as we started going, we started developing this storyline for it, and we started saying, "Well, where did he come from?" And we start having some fun with it. And it's like, "Well, why is he fucking here? And why has he got a SIIGA? He's got a SIIGA t-shirt on. What's that
okay.
cassette about? It's like, what the fuck is he? What, like, he's not just some like statue. What is he? And
Yeah.
so she and I started kind of talking about that, and we started developing this kind of like story in our minds of where we thought he'd come from, and why is he relating to me, and all of that kind of stuff, and so we kind of have got that all sort of we're fucking about with that. We're kind of that's why I don't want to sort of say too much more about it. But what I will say was, in the end, I decided to go over, and so Sarah and I went over to Los Angeles last year, and then we got some even more amazing, crazy people who were just wanted to have an adventure, and we took this old 80s sports car and took it to the middle of the Mojave Desert and fucking found a dry salt lake bed like the old 80s road movies. And I got fucking dressed in this robot suit and I drove this fucking car across a desert lake bed in the fucking 110-degree fucking heat.
You see?
So, I don't give a fuck about playing a stadium, man. I get dressed as a robot and drive an 80s car in the desert.
Yeah.
Like, it's a
I
winner
mean,
for me.
you see, you grew up watching movies and Star Wars and shit, and now you were the one
I'm in
wearing.
it.
Yeah, you made it.
So yeah, so that's the story of the robot. And like I say, over the next sort of up probably the next 6 to 8 months, you'll
Just
start to sort of see what he's all about.
okay. So
Yeah,
the plan is after recovery start to releasing other songs before the full
yeah,
release of the album.
yeah. I'm gonna go back to. I mean, when I first started SIIGA, I was on my own. I was just doing it because I felt like doing it. I wasn't motivated
Yeah.
by anything other than just trying to make some cool stuff. And when I released that first record, I just released a song every month.
Yeah.
I was kind of ahead of my time really with it at the time, but I released a sort of song and then released another one because I'd kind of come to the conclusion in my head that I felt like everybody's in such a fucking rush. Like they get a song and it's like, what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? And then in the background, you're like, look, it took me fucking 3 years to make that. Like you've had it for fucking 10 minutes and you're asking me what's next. Like just slow down a minute, It's like so, and I think now I see musicians getting so sucked into this trap of panicking that they need to have new stuff, new stuff,
The
new stuff, new.
music immediately.
I'm just like fucking like if it's quality, you don't need to be fucking worrying about like slamming it out, slamming it out, slamming it out. And to each their own. I'm not knocking anybody for that, but for me, I'm kind of like I'm not racing anybody here other than myself. Like this isn't about like I'm only trying to like better myself. Like
Yeah.
I'm trying to, I'm in competition with my fucking self every day. That's why I'm such a fucking nut job because I'm like always like I need to do another one, I need to do another one. But it's like that's enough for me. Like it's like I don't need to be worrying about what anyone else is doing.
You
So I'm
are
like,
good now.
just put out a song and let it be for a while. And so that was sort of my ethos when I started this thing way back. I was like, put a song out
Oh,
and then just let it find its way for a bit, and then another one, and then let people have it. So when we went to do this record, and we kind of were at a point where I could have gone back with the sort of label thing that I'd done with Gemini. Didn't feel like it was the right move. Whether it is or not, I don't know. You could argue it, maybe it would have been, but at the time I thought, no, I think maybe go back to kind of the freedom of how I felt when I started this. And so Ian and I had a long talk about that, and we decided that we were going to just do a label of our own to release
okay.
under. So, and then because we kind of sat and thought about it, and we're like, well, we're kind of self-sufficient. We make our own records. We write, it's like I'm writing it. We're producing it ourselves. We record it ourselves. We're mixing it ourselves. We're not really, kind of needing anybody. So we're kind of like,
Why don't
I
do
worked I worked when I was a kid. When I left school, I was actually talking about this last week because I met up with my friend. We're in the middle of doing something together just now. But I worked when I left school as I don't know what you call it in Italy, but it's like a laborer. So like like a carpenter, a builder.
Yeah.
So like I just came after school. I left school and I was like, my mum was like, you need to go and work. So I end up like I'm fucking shoveling shit into a cement mixer, or I'm like fucking carrying bags of bricks and shit around. And I remember, and he is a very, very close friend of mine who had done that for very, very quickly realized that was not the career for me. And I left and did something else. But at the time, I remember going and we were chatting, and he was like
The,
a very skilled kind of tradesman. And I remember him saying to me, he was like, whatever you do in your life, he says, and he used the C word, but he was like, make sure what was it he said now? I've forgotten it now. It's that important. He said, he said, make sure you can do everyone else's job, but nobody can do your job. He said
exactly.
to me. And
That's
that's what he said to me. And I was only about fucking 16, I think, at the time. And I kind of remember that in my head. And I kind of thought, yeah, you need to make sure that you're always indispensable in your own kind of creative life, and sort of like
yeah.
so it kind of that sort of like thing has been kind of I've always carried that where I'm kind of like always be self-sufficient, make sure you can don't ever be like leaning on like if someone
On
pulls the
someone. Yeah, that's true.
yeah if someone pulls out you're fucked. Now I've never
No,
wanted to
that's
be like
true.
that,
It's
so
in life. That's true in life. As
I
a
totally.
yeah.
You've got to. I think so, Ada. I think you've got to kind of try not to put your foundations on other people,
No.
because I think a lot of people found out that the hard way with all that COVID
Yeah,
stuff,
no,
it was like,
that's true. But
so
I
that's
think
kind of been my attitude with music
I
the whole
think
way.
older we get, more we see it. More we see it. Maybe when you are younger, you don't see it immediately, but older you got. I mean, growing up, you notice that you have to learn to do everything by yourself, because it's okay sometimes asking for help, but leaning to someone else somehow it may sound, I don't know, negative, sad, but you end up just leaning on yourself always. So it's if there
Totally
is
agree.
people helping, which is different, helping, it's okay, it's fun. But like you said, when for the album for nostalgia burns, it's just you're doing everything you're on. You don't need a label. But if there is the help of a booking agency, of a costume design,
Hmm.
that's okay.
Yeah,
Need the
yeah.
help. Not
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I should very heavily say, I mean, I certainly have not made that record. I mean, Ian and I have collaborated together I mean, I think it's about like be self-sufficient, but
yeah,
then start to introduce people who are really strong. I mean, I would
exactly.
say with this record, it's felt very much like a kind of trio kind of thing. I felt like a kind of I've done this kind of musical journey of this record with Ian, where it's been very much, I mean, I've written the songs and I've kind of come in with the whole concept of it, but we've gone on this journey together of recording this album, and it's become more than I could have done on my own. And I think that's kind of the important thing, is to, is like acknowledge when you can kind of, if somebody brings something that takes something further than you could have just done. And then the other side of that, by meeting Sarah, I had the idea to have the robot. But without Sarah, I would have been up in the sky with a fucking tinfoil box in it. So, and so suddenly, instead of that, I was in the middle of Mojave Desert, just a fucking robot driving a car. So
Yeah,
it's like there's been
exactly.
these amazing things have happened by just kind of turning up ready, I think,
To the also, yes, that's what the
Yeah.
process, that's what the helps of also brilliant mind helps, because that has to be like a connection with your minds too, otherwise you wouldn't fit, because like we said before, if these minds are not flowing like yours, you wouldn't be surrounded by
Yeah.
these people, so you
I
just
think the other thing I do is it's like I think it's like ego is a killer a lot of the time with these kind of things. When people, like, I think you've got to be like, I'm very lucky that, like, it's kind of like these people, you know like I've kind of been around a fair bit, and I kind of tend to find that, like, really talented
okay.
people or talented creative people tend to not really be people who are that pushy about themselves, or, like,
Exactly.
and oftentimes I meet a lot of people who talk a really good talk, like, and I think to myself, oh wow. And then when actually when they need to bring the kind of the food to the table, it tastes like shit. It's
No, no,
kind of
no,
like,
exactly, because that's they don't brag about their own skill.
yeah,
Prefer maybe staying silent, or just
yeah,
sometimes that's the silence that put everything out there all the time. It's all, like I say,
yeah,
here we say it's all kind of smoke, just it's all smoke and nothing
yeah.
else.
Yeah, we say in Scotland, what I think we say, all mouth and no trousers.
Yeah, something like that. Because you put it all onto the stage. There's nothing like in. I mean, yeah, they have quality, of course, they're human being, but it's like you're an amazing designer, or drawer, or painter. You put two amazing painting, and then there's
Mm,
nothing else. Maybe there are amazing painters that they do the amazing I don't know, comic book whatsoever, and then you maybe just see once in every 3 years,
mm,
because they, or maybe don't know, they just don't even get out of their home. I can
I
imagine.
think a lot of, sorry, no, sorry, I didn't
No,
mean
I
to.
say, I just imagine how many really interesting and really genius people are just stuck in their house, never leaving
I
their
totally
house.
agree. Yeah, I think you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. I have a real issue with people putting kind of creativity on this pedestal, like it's this kind
Yeah,
of, like, thing. I've always said that. I've had a lot of people say to me in my life, "Oh, you're lucky because you get, you're doing this," and I'm always kind of the opinion where I'm like, anybody can. I was like, it's not special. It's just finding
you're
your
right.
language that
Yeah,
works for you. I think if I hadn't have picked up, like, if that guy hadn't have moved in next door with his glasses and his hair,
exactly.
I'd probably be sitting, I don't know, I'd be making fucking furniture or something. I'd probably be just as happy doing that because I was making
You
something.
like
It's just
yeah,
finding a language that you kind of
of
like, just
expression.
of
Yeah,
expression. There you go. Yeah, exactly.
language of
So, but I think the thing that I'm always very grateful for with this project of SIIGA is that it kind of allows me to sort of explore everything. It's like I get to write songs, I get to play all these different instruments, I get to record, I get to fucking make art, I get to make videos, I get to dress a
yeah.
fucking robot, I get whatever it is.
What is gonna be next? So
It's like, I think this is
yeah,
the, I'm gonna fucking blow the robot up and disappear and never come back. I think that's
I
the
go
end of it.
I take spaceship and go to somewhere,
Yeah.
we don't know where.
Well, I think, we'll see how life goes with the robot, but I think hopefully I'll get to tell his story. We'll see. It'd be nice to be able to tell it. The story that we've got for him is very interesting, and it kind of raises a lot of questions. My desire with that robot was to try and make something non-human
Okay.
that would conjure up a kind of empathy, a human kind of
Yeah,
feeling. And sort of, I remember saying to Sarah in the middle of it, I was like, if we can get to a point where you feel like a level of love and care or like sad or whatever it is, an emotion from this machine, then
exactly.
we've done our job. Because to me, I feel like we've lost our basic
Empathy.
humanity, our basic manners and things,
We lost
And I
empathy.
feel empathy, yeah. And it's like
We are empty. Some people are empty.
empty. And I kind of feel like that's how I've felt over the last while with the robot. We've got a shot. It's one of my favorite pictures we've taken with it. We took a picture and there was a fucking heat wave in Los Angeles. It was like 100+ degrees. And it was the first time I'd worn the thing and I was dying inside it. It was so hot. Like it's got different layers. But we took this shot and I'm in this bathroom and it's really cool, kind of almost mid-century kind of like vibe of the decor and everything in it. And it looks like and it's the robot's house essentially. And there's a shot, and I think I was just so tired, but I'm kind of leaning like that and I'm looking in the bathroom mirror, and then the shot is the robot's head looking at itself like that, tired in the bathroom mirror. And there's just something about that picture where I'm like, to me, the
Okay.
interesting thing about that robot, every time we put that robot visual in a
Yeah.
very basic human kind of
Yeah.
context, it's very, very
It
interesting what
sounds,
it conjures up
and I think
because it
that
kind of,
sounds you feel connected to it deeply.
yeah. So I'm hoping that it'll. I think at the moment I'm in this period where some people are like, "What the fuck is this?" But it'll
Yeah,
come.
people are
It'll
trying
come.
to find out. People are trying to find out. I think. I mean, I was like also when I saw on Instagram, I said, well, everything disappeared. It's only the Instagram about the it's a robot Instagram now. What is going on there? What's going on? Wait, because you're trying to build a story. That's how. And
Yeah. So
fine.
I think the next stage
Yeah.
of that. Um, yeah. I mean, it was crazy. Like, so we've ended up. Sarah pulled in some of her friends in Los Angeles. So there was really lovely guy, Doug Cheney, who's a director, and Jackie, I can never pronounce her surname right. It looks like Moonves or something. I don't know how to pronounce her surname, but it's those two guys kind of jumped on board and came to the desert with us and filmed. And Doug also, we did this whole sequence in a lab and stuff of the origin of the robot and stuff. So there's all this kind of cinematic kind of stuff that we've
Yeah.
done that's going to kind of come out as the tracks kind of go along.
Okay. There's a lot of cinema, but also
Yeah,
you got that in you. Always you got the cinematic.
yeah, I think it's kind of like yeah, I don't know. I kind of sometimes go through different feelings about it though, because I don't know. Sometimes I worry that like I've got a visual in my head all the time when I'm making a song, and then like I'll put that visual out. But sometimes I think maybe I shouldn't do it at all because I don't want to like steal somebody else's kind of like you can color it if you know what I mean. Like I'm like I think
Okay, I get what you mean. Yeah.
so I sometimes think maybe I shouldn't actually do any visuals because maybe I should. I always wonder if that's maybe why, like, how you had like the Beatles' White Album. It was just a white cover. There
Yeah,
was
and
no artwork.
giving like
You,
the listener to
to
visualize
fill
something.
yeah. So that I kind of sometimes
You-
wonder if that's maybe. So I'm so kind of color obsessed. I think, if I ever even make another record, but I'm like maybe I'll do one that's just fucking black and white or something, or just like no cover or
Like
something.
only
But
just like paint yourself, like color yourself book, like
color
something.
yourself, but yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of hard. You said earlier, like, what next after a rose? I was thinking about that recently. I thought, fucking hell. I was like, okay, now what? It's like, how do you go
I
above
think you
that,
have
building a
still
robot?
you have still to release the album, so
That's true. Yeah, in my head, it's gone, it's finished. But you're right. Yeah, I need to kind of
yes,
release the
still
record, but
to release singles,
still got. I
the
know.
album.
It's part of the reason, to be honest with you, Ed, it's another part of the reason that I wanted to do the robot because I have. You're probably seeing a pattern here, but like I kind of the thing that turns me on and gets me excited is the making of something, like making the thing. Once
Yeah.
I've made the thing, I kind of am ready to sort of move on. And so the
Okay.
music industry kind of almost goes at sort of butts
Yeah.
against me in that sense because what you do is you spend all this time making it, then you've got to spend all this time trying to promote it, and all of
Yeah,
that stuff I find really fucking boring, and I hate it, to be honest with you. And so like the kind of, I'm just like, I've made this fucking thing, now I just want to go make something else. But I think that with the robot and my journey with Sarah and everything that we're doing, it really was a nice thing to have to
I
kind of
definitely
look
want to
forward
do.
to, because it's like another adventure I'm on now,
Yeah,
and I get to use the record to sort of have this adventure. So my
exactly.
interest in this project is still very kind of
Yeah, because
present, because I'm getting, yeah, I've got this thing to play with almost. Do you know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, and
So,
also
and
you're bringing the people like me and the other people that are listening and are seeing this journey into the journey. So that's also
yeah,
one thing you're doing. You are conducting the journey, or
yeah, yeah.
you're letting the listener going through the journey itself.
Go through the journey.
Yeah,
I'm trying to, yeah, I think I just have to kind of feel interested with it, and then I'll keep going. And I think that, because when I finish a record, I often, like, I'll never listen to it again. That's the end of it. You know, once it's done, like, I don't go and listen to it.
so
It's like you move on,
yeah,
and you
to
know,
the next thing, to something else.
it's like it's like a drug addict in a way. You like trying to chase that first fucking experience you had again. You
Yeah,
know,
it's
it's
like
like you
when
kind of,
you want to feel like the adrenaline, that's something that gives you
uh,
and then when the adrenaline fades, you
you're
seeking
looking for it again.
another dose, let's say, of adrenaline.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And for me,
Yeah,
that adrenaline or whatever we want to call it, that comes from that spark. That the most exciting thing for me with music is that little moment you get where there's an idea and it's not
you
quite
want to
fucking
develop.
there, it's just starting to pop and fizz and turn
Yeah, I
into a
know.
thing, and you're kind of there, and you've got this, you might have like a little guitar thing or a melody or the chord or something,
You
and
want
you're
to
like,
develop.
fuck, okay, there's, you know, and it's like, and you're living,
Exactly.
and that's the most alive moment. You're like in this thing, and
I
then you're,
know, I know.
and sort of, and so when you finish the song and you finish recording it and everything, it's lovely and it's nice and you're done, but you're definitely have a minute where you're craving that other thing again, where you kind of go, I want to go and find another
Yeah,
new little thing to kind of get. Because what happens to me is like, maybe because it takes me a while to make records because of the way that I
yeah.
work and stuff, but like I kind of, my tank gets really full. But I'm always, I'm kind of, the only kind of mental peace I get in my life is the kind of like, I usually get like a couple of months after I finish an album where
Wow.
I suddenly have nothing in my head anymore, and I kind of go a little bit brain dead, and I just kind of like, it's sort of like
You need to rest. It's not.
you just kind of go and it's like there's nothing there anymore, and you kind of, and every time I get to that point, I always say I'm never doing this again. I'm not doing anymore. I'm fucking not doing this again.
And then
Like
you
I'm
got the
always
spark.
like,
And then you got
yeah,
the spark
and
again.
then 2 months later, I'm like, well, maybe I'll just try a little thing here, or maybe I'll just try. The next thing you know, I got a fucking robot, you know, or whatever, you know.
Maybe next time. I don't know, who knows? Maybe this journey, because I think it's something that you can't even know by now, because maybe, I don't know, this journey is gonna develop in and you wanna have a spark and continue that journey in the future.
Maybe you never know. I
Or
think,
maybe
I
there's
mean,
gonna be other ideas, I think. I mean,
I'm working on this other idea at the moment. I've always got a little kind of like, yeah,
how, how many things you got in your, how many
I
stock storage
know, I
you have?
know. I'm not fucking well, man. I've got too much going on. Yeah, I've had this little thing that I've been kind of working on the side for the last few years that started off in France, and it was another accident that happened to me, that I found the thread of this little story that, but one afternoon, that kind of, yeah, I don't want to give too much of it away, but I don't know
Okay,
whether it's a
yeah.
SIIGA project or not, but I kind of feel like it's like a kind of, I've always wanted to try and write a piece of music. I mean, it's like the worst creative decision in this current like climate that we're in I could ever
Yeah.
make, but who gives a fuck? But it's like it's almost like I want to write this kind of, almost like a classical piece of music that goes through movements, and like,
Okay.
and I kind of, I've made a very rough start on it visually, and it kind of came from the time I spent out in the Cevennes mountains in France, and that kind of period of time where I was really kind of cut off from the world. And so during the time I was writing these songs and things, I was also kind of going on these random adventures where I would leave my phone and not take any sat nav and not take any
Okay.
fucking like maps or anything. And I was just driving off into the wild sort of landscape and
Like,
seeing where I could get lost in.
yeah,
And
that's
then
the
one
wanderer, yeah, the wandering, yeah, wanderer.
wondering, and
Sorry.
this weird sort of thing happened to me where I ended up in this very remote village in the mountains one afternoon. And without giving the whole story away, basically, I was walking around this village. There was nobody around. It was like October, everything, all the window, everything's
Yeah.
shut. And I was just walking around, and I found this like there was all these like statue heads somebody had carved in this like garden, and it was really weird. And I was looking at them, and saying, "How cool is that?" And then I found this like little plaque, and it turned out to be a plaque of a statue
Okay.
uh, that was a that was like a tribute to a Scottish writer who I'm not going to mention the name of
Okay.
it in case anyone listens to that and steals my idea, but it gave me this
Okay.
idea, and then I was like, oh wait, and I realized I was actually weirdly following the same path as this guy, and there was this weird connection between Scotland and this area
Okay.
that I was in. And then I started reading up about it. Then this other weird thing happened when I came back to Scotland. Somebody sent me a fucking book out of the blue one day in a package that turned out to be the book that this guy had fucking written. It was like
What's
weird
going
shit.
on with you?
Yeah, I know.
You and the coincidence.
And so then ah, I was like, this is a signpost. I was like, it's definitely a signpost. So then I kind of was back down. I went back down to, was it last year? I think it was. I spent some time with the intention in my mind to start working on this. So I've got this piece of music.
Yeah.
I don't know. It might take me fucking 10 years to finish it, but it's like this
Yes.
kind of, who cares? But the
Yeah.
doing is the joy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
It's your
but
journey.
I don't know. Yeah. So I've got this idea in my head. I don't think it's a SIIGA record, but who knows? But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was looking through recently some of the kind of things, the kind of trail of things that I've left behind over the last while, and I thought we've got this robot, I've got a video with a fucking mermaid in it at one point, we've got fucking anime, it's like I don't know what the fuck, like it's like I don't know where I fit
Writers.
into the world of music at all. I don't even care anymore. I used to kind
Writers.
of
Now
think,
you're gonna I'm gonna send you something from Al Pacino from Corleone then some
please, yeah, send me something. It happens, like I just feel like I don't need much. Like you just get a thing, something will spark an idea,
and
and
keep you
I
interested.
just it's the bit. Yeah, I got to stay interested. If it's not like if it's not exciting, then I'm just kind of like man, like just life's very the whole classic line, life's too short. But it's like you've got to
Like you said,
you've got to feel interested in life.
it's like a wonder in life when you go and do things. When you find
Totally,
places that's things that I do and I will do later. Just take the car, drive.
and go.
I don't know. It's a wood. It's a wood. You go there and I go there. If I want, I don't know, just stay in the wood. If I just want, I go forward. And it's like here in Sicily. You might never know what you can find. You can
Hmm.
find
Hmm.
a lost. I don't know. There is, for example, a lost village after the earthquake. So you can see
Hmm.
completely shattered.
Yeah.
And you go there, you don't know what you can find there. You can find the life
Hmm.
as it was once. So at the
Yeah.
moment of the
Amazing.
earthquake, and you find these places just without freaking
Without phone, yeah,
just
I
what
know.
happened.
And
And
also the beauty of that is also like not taking the fucking phone with you to
exactly,
video the whole thing and fucking document it
just
all and just live it for a while,
yeah. I
I
mean,
mean, I'm guilty of that sometimes. I use my phone, but I try now as much as I can just to go and live my life without taking this digital technology with me to document every fucking minute of it and just actually try and be in what you're doing because it's like, yeah, we're becoming very motivated to do things on what the outcome's going to be rather than actually like being in the minute
enjoying
of
in
it,
the moment.
Yeah. I mean, it's very cliched, but it is
No, but
true,
it's
You've
true.
got
It's
to,
true. You feel it.
there's a reason. But you come from you're Italian, you're in Sicily there. I mean, you come from a country that's steeped in like such a rich history of design and creativity and music. You know, it's like it was, you know, Italy was the epicenter of, like, you know, kind of art, and there's such kind of
And
like
especially of slower life, of lower,
slower life. Well, it's that
really
Mediterranean kind of style living, you know, that you have. Like, it's the same across. I noticed it through the south of France, living
yeah,
there, and friends that I have. Like I said to you earlier, I've got friends in Italy, and you
yeah.
know, I've got friends in Spain, and that kind of that archway of Southern Europe there.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
living the slow
it's a
breathe.
slow life, partly because you're completely fucking full of all that old bloody Latin fucking bureaucracy that means that you can't do anything fucking fast. But it forces you to
I
kind
mean,
of
really, if you are here, you can't even have a bus that if you want to go to a
yeah,
mount, you have to need to have a car. So if you
yeah.
don't have a car, you be better a good walker. Otherwise,
It's
there's
yeah.
no
It's
one give.
I learned that lesson. You're right. You have to have, like, yeah. I think the slower life I found, certainly with my time living in France, and like I say, I'm back down there this year for a good chunk. It forces me to just kind of just stop for a bit, you
Yeah,
know, and kind of also I start to take in things a bit more. That it's very kind of contrived sounding, but that kind of year and a bit that I spent during 2020 down there, because I was forced to stop. I was like, I've never felt so connected to the natural world as I felt
yeah,
like I was when I was there. The colors of the sky, the movement. I could see why all these painters migrated to these areas, like, you know, Provence, and you know, like,
that is really
just
good.
that whole region, because every moment and second with the color and the shadow and the light and the sounds, and it's so stimulating to be in that
Yeah,
environment. I mean, I can imagine you're saying to me that you spend your weekends and you drive off out to the countryside to
yeah. I'm
plug
gonna
into
send you some
that.
photo. Yeah, I'm gonna send you some
Yeah,
photo later of the woods.
please do. Yeah, no,
Visual.
please
I
do.
know. I already got your point of view, like kind of how you see it with the color and the light. And even if you have a photo, I think you have to see through the photo the smell to see to
Mhm.
smell the scent, the to hear almost the sound of the trees, for example, the scent of the grass. You have to feel all the five senses through a photo, for
Mhm.
example, or a song completely.
Yeah.
That's I
Yeah,
think
it's a different it's a different kind of, when you have that kind of climate, I certainly find, because obviously I come from a very picturesque and kind of beautiful part of the world in terms of sky. There's a different kind of nature there. It's a very wild nature. It's a very harsh kind of nature. It's a very kind of rugged landscape, and it can be quite brutal because of the weather. You know, we get a lot of wind, you get a lot of rain. It's hard won quite often to be in the nature up there. I mean, it's beautiful in its whole other way, but it doesn't force you. It doesn't give you that slow living kind of nature, because oftentimes you're out in it and it's like you're against the elements. You're kind of battling to be outside in it.
wait for
Whereas when I,
Sicily when it's raining because here, for example, in the main city, it could be amazing slower, but if the system doesn't work well, we have flooding. So
oh
it's
really, you get
it's
flooding?
bugging
Yeah,
us.
yeah,
So, or we can be
yeah.
dry as well because don't forget we are close to the north part of Africa. So we're in the center
That's
of
right.
the kind of Mediterranean. So we got the
Hmm.
dryness in a couple of weeks, I guess. We're gonna start to have dryness, and then
Yeah,
in winter we're gonna have completely. I don't know. It's worse than English weather sometimes. Now it's
really.
like this. Now in 3 hours I have to work out. It's
Do you have? I mean, it's been nice here. Do you have dust? A lot of dust comes across. Then do you like get a lot of
we have
like sand? That's what I
sandstone.
mean. Yeah,
Sandstone,
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
we have a lot.
yeah, yeah.
If you see my car now,
I was going to say, I bet when you open the door of your car, it's all foolish. But
we have
yeah,
the you can see these gigantic clouds which are like
yeah,
sandy, and when it's rain, which is terrible because you have to spend a lot of money to clean your car, it's
mm,
completely brownish, sandy.
covered
Even
in
in my
brown. Yeah,
balcony, I said, okay, I want to have a, I don't know,
yeah,
atmospheric house with small sand. I guess gonna pour the sand inside. It's literally
yeah,
sanded from the desert, I think. And I find out that in Sicily, in summer, we have a part because it dries that it's a desert. literally. It says dunes
Yeah.
of desert. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It's in the center.
Yeah.
So even myself, I don't know things about my land. That's something that I want to go. Like I said, put in the car to go for a walk, whatever, and just get lost. And
Get lost. Yeah.
maybe knowing where I'm going to see, but even like how you find out that the statue of that writer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
It happens to me when I went in a castle and in a medieval castle, and I find out because my ancestors are from Normandy, and I find out,
are they
yeah,
really?
and I find out that we're from Normandy, and the one that I more close, there was this kind of whatever the family, let's say
Like
signature.
a crest type
Yeah,
thing.
that's
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
with
Yeah.
the name and everything. And I was like, wait a second, that's the white lily. I like the white lily, like all this thing. Like that's why I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
interested in
Okay.
that. That's why I'm interested in the northern culture, because there was something
Understood. Yeah.
calling. Yeah, and you see there
Yeah. Yeah.
what's going on. And you were writing song. I was writing book. I was starting writing a book about it.
Nice.
Then you get lost, and then things change, life changes, and then you maybe lost interest, and then you move in another thing. I
You can
really
pick it back up
understand.
again.
I think I really understand you in that. That's why I have to also to shift, move, and especially learn. Your brain always
Mm-hmm.
has to learn.
Mm-hmm.
I am the
So
one.
how did you track that ancestry back to Normandy then? Was that with one of these like online
Yeah.
DNA things
No,
or?
no, no, no. It's I went for 9 years to study medieval history, and one of my professor in medieval history, she was a professor of Sicily of medieval times, and we were just talking, and she said, your last name, which is Manfred, seems really similar to one of the son of the king of the Regnum Sicily, the kingdom of Sicily. So she's just I talk with my uncle, which is really someone which is in depth, deep about spending money about that. So he pays whatever he has to search for. They went to the Vatican, like the library. So tracking from grandfather, we found out that the great-great-grandfather was the king of Sicily, the emperor of. So it was the grandson of Frederick Redbird, just to say this, the grandson.
Okay.
Frederick. And Frederick II, which is the grandfather, was his mom was from Normandy. She was one of the last woman from the Hauteville family. So kind of a granddaughter of Rollo of Normandy. So that's a lot in between. Yeah, that's a lot of.
So did you say so your uncle went to the Vatican to go through the libraries there to find this stuff out?
To my professor, because
Wow.
she was
Through
a
your
teacher.
professor, yeah.
She has all the
Access.
yes,
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah. Wow.
not all is public what she can see, because you have to go to look in the monastery to just see the
Do
death.
they let you do that? Do you have to go there physically for that, or you can do that online, or do you actually travel
No, I
to?
think she went.
She went. Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah.
people
Wow.
when you are a professor in medieval history, you have a lot of connection, especially because there is a
Wow.
history of Christianism,
Yeah.
Catholic. So you got to know a little bit of, especially Italy is small. I think a professor know a little bit everyone.
That's interesting. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
That's cool. Yeah. Very.
yeah,
So you studied medieval history then, Ada?
Yeah, 9 years. But then I moved to naturopathic study. That's a completely two different things. So yeah, that's like I told you, I have to learn everything because I don't
Well,
know.
it's good. It's good to be interested in the world. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you must 9 years of that.
Yeah, because I loved so much medieval history that I was coming every year to do the same lesson. So it took me a lot to take the degree, but I was coming
You
back.
you're definitely due a trip to Scotland then to dig around some old castles for sure.
Yeah, I got lost to find out all the history. Don't worry. I know already some of the places that I want to go and see, and I know already a little bit of the history. I know the history, so don't worry. I'm about the Orchid Island with the Viking builder, and then what happened after all they wanted to go in Anglia. I did a little bit. I mean, I was an historian. Now I'm a naturopath. So enough about that. We have just 7 minutes. In 7 minutes, just let's put it everything to end and just give a good ending. Otherwise, we have another 9 minutes and we
Another 9 minutes.
tomorrow. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest with you, I think you should leave all that interesting stuff about Sicily in the interview because I think that's more
Yeah, I'm
interesting
gonna
than
leave
what
it.
I've been talking about. Please do. Yeah, make sure you do because I don't want to, I feel conscious that it sounds like I'm just talking about myself for fucking 3 hours.
Interview is about you, but it's not about.
Well, yeah, I'm interested though in what you're doing. That's really cool. Yeah, I don't know. That's where we're at then. I mean, so the
Okay,
rest
so
of how to wrap it up. I think we've got the two singles out. We've got another
yeah,
track. We're just
coming
getting
on.
ready. We've got
Okay.
very very talented singer is joining me on that. A young female singer. So I'll hold off saying who it is until we get there. But so she's joined us on a couple of tracks.
Okay.
So that's the next song. And then we're actually at the moment trying to, I think we're going to organise, we're going to do a gig in Glasgow, hopefully in the
Okay.
next couple of months.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Ian and I will come out and we've got this duo kind of set we've been
Okay.
doing where we like strip everything back down and do the songs in a very kind of sort of intimate kind of way. For
Okay.
me, with songwriting, even although I tend to write these kind of cinematic pieces of
Yeah.
music, I still always try and make sure that if you take all that stuff away, the song feels strong enough to
Strong.
kind of
Yeah.
connect in a very raw sense. So,
Yeah.
so we're going to do some of that over the next while. And then, like I said, the record will just kind of come out kind of piece by piece. And then the whole thing will kind of come out as a whole by the end. And then we've got some plans for when we get that. So, yeah,
Okay.
that's kind of,
Yeah,
but
for the
it's
end of
going to take its time.
for when it's gonna be ready, it's gonna be out and the story will be revealed. Be close because we're gonna have to do another not 5 hours, like 3 hours.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
keep it
Maybe we'll
short.
do 10 minutes.
Okay, so it's out. So what it's about? Okay, it's out. Okay, so bye. So
Done. Yeah, yeah. Next.
no, but at least also involve the other person maybe who took part in the project would be nice as well to hear their
Yeah,
point
yeah.
of view in the journey
For
itself.
sure. Well, that's the plan. I think, at the moment I'm obviously sitting here talking about it, but the Ian and I have got some plans to do some kind of stuff and talk
Okay.
about the record and the process of that. And Sarah and I have got a lot of plans to kind of sort of show this robot and
Yeah.
everything else. So that's all ahead as well. But I started a Patreon recently, which has been quite interesting as well. So I've kind of been sort of using that as a way to kind of
Okay.
connect directly with people. So yeah, we're just doing it in our own way this time, Ada. I mean, like we don't have the nice kind of thing about this record for me is that we're not really on anyone else's kind of timeline now. We can just
Yeah, this
do
year on
it
your
as we feel.
own
Yeah. And
timeline. Yeah.
so I'm just like, I'm putting stuff out,
Lower.
let it sit for a bit, and then like, okay, that feels like
Yes.
I feel like it's like waiting to see kind of what direction
Yeah.
feels like it's gonna pull you in,
Spontaneous in this way. And it's more
Spontaneous,
interesting
yeah.
and
It's more interesting, yeah.
it keeps people, being more interested and getting to know they wanted to know what's happening next. So it's kind of a
Maybe. Or they think, what the fuck is this guy doing?
come on. Okay, so just to wrap it
But
up.
do you know what? Either one's a result. It doesn't matter. If they're wondering what the fuck I'm doing, whether it is it's both a win.
I mean, it's a journey, that's for sure. And I think understanding also all the concept and the meaning behind it is going to make it more interesting. And especially, like you said, it doesn't matter if it's just colorful, cinematic. People gonna feel it in their own way. That's important.
Mm.
So
Well, I think that's it. You've got to try and, there's definitely, I've got a very clear idea,
yeah,
certainly, of where this is going, but I'd like to try and keep things a little bit loose sometimes so that people can interpret
yeah,
their own. I think that art is always, I think for
exactly.
me, art should always be left a little bit where there's a space for the person
Yeah,
who's either watching or listening to be able to fill the gap
exactly,
themselves and then make it personal.
exactly. So with this last pearl of wiseness,
Feels like a good ending.
yeah. Otherwise, we can have a start to order pizza, start to go to call Apache.
It's going to turn into an online party, Anyway,
Yeah,
I'm going for have a fucking beer after this. I was expecting this to be done at lunchtime.
but it's me too. But it's fun. It was spontaneous. You see, that's good.
Well, I'm very grateful that you're interested enough, and I'm sorry it took me 3 years to say yes to
Don't
you, but you can
worry.
see why.
Don't worry, now I know. It was a really pleasure meeting you, Richard. And let's stay in touch.
Likewise.
I'm gonna send you for real the photo after. So
Please do. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Please do.
Okay.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot. And it's nice to hear
Thank you
about your
so
life
much.
over there. It sounds very interesting. And I hope that you, like I say, if you're going to come to Scotland, certainly let me know. I'll
Of
give you
course.
any advice
Oh,
I
thanks.
can help you with for sure.
Yeah.
Avoid you getting mauled by midges and things like that. So,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
So thank you so much. And talk later then. What kind of
Till next time.
see you in 10 years by now.
See you in 3 years. Absolutely. I don't know what I'll have turned into by then. Maybe not a robot, but anyway, good to see you.
Bye,
Take
Richard.
care.
Bye, Richard.
Bye bye.
Don't grow